You'll be able to choose from any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and explore Greece like never before. Plus, you'll also win £10,000 in tax-free cash to make your summer sizzle. And we'll pack you off with these luxury travel gifts. For a chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Dubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Wednesday, the 3rd of April.
Now, as 3 Brits are killed in an Israeli strike on their aid convoy, calls mount for Britain to suspend arms sales to Israel. Could the deaths of John Chapman, James Henderson and James Kirby prove to be a watershed moment in this war?
Overwhelmed. Scottish police have received thousands of hate crime referrals since the SNP's new speech laws came into effect this week. Even First Minister Humza Yousaf has now been reported himself. We have all the details.
And a teacher in Birmingham has been sacked for undermining British values after he claimed Islam will take over and westernised girls are lunatics. How could such a man be allowed to teach for quite so long?
Now, 3 British men have been killed in Israel in an aid convoy that they were told was safe. And the question is arising, is this now a turning point in this war, particularly with regard to Western support for Israel's defence?
Yes, absolutely. And a number of prominent politicians, including the leader of the Liberal Democrats and a former National Security Advisor, Lord Peter Ricketts, have both suggested, among other voices, of course, that Britain should now pause arms sales to Israel off the back of this incident. We want to know whether your view has changed at all due to this horrific tragedy. In terms of whether you still support Israel's right to defend itself, whether you still support Israel's aims in the region with regard to Gaza, Do you accept the IDF's apology? They've come out and they've said this was a grave mistake and they're going to do an investigation. Do you believe that that investigation will give us the answers that we need? Rishi Sunak has demanded such an investigation. So has Lord Cameron, David Cameron, our Foreign Secretary now. Has this changed your view? Do you think Britain should pause arms sales to Israel? Not forever, potentially, but to show a sign that this will not be tolerated. What do you think? GBnews at gbnews.com.
Really interested to get your view and whether or not you think that this war has reached perhaps a turning point. But that's GBviews at gbnews.com. We're getting to that and so many other stories too after your headlines with Sam.
Tom and Emily, thank you very much, and good afternoon from the newsroom just after 12 o'clock. And we start with a recap of that news of the incident in Gaza. The Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, has now described the deaths of three British aid workers in Gaza as dreadful and says we should mourn the loss of the brave humanitarian workers there. John Chapman, James Henderson and James Kirby were delivering vital food supplies when their convoy was hit. They were part of a group of 7 aid workers from the World Central Kitchen charity. They'd coordinated their movements with Israel's military before they set off in 2 armoured cars marked with that NGO's logo. Lord Cameron says more still needs to be done to make sure aid workers are kept safe.
I welcome what the Israeli Foreign Minister said yesterday to me about a full, urgent and transparent inquiry into how this dreadful event was allowed to happen. And we want to see that happen very, very quickly. I also welcome the fact that he spoke about much more aid getting into Gaza, up to 500 trucks a day. That is essential. We've been promised these things before, and this really needs to happen.
9 people are now known to have died and more than 800 injured after an earthquake in Taiwan. It's the biggest quake there in 25 years. If you're watching on television, this was the moment that it hit the East Coast. Well, as you can see there, those tremors were recorded as high as 7.7 in magnitude around 8 o'clock this morning local time. That was as people were heading to work and to school. Emergency services are now trying to rescue any survivors. We understand more than 100 are still trapped in tunnels, under buildings that have collapsed or stuck under landslides. A man has been stabbed to death on the outskirts of a migrant camp near Dunkirk in France. That camp currently houses around 200 migrants in tents and other makeshift structures. Police there say the man died at the scene just less than an hour after emergency services arrived. So far, no witnesses have come forward, and authorities in France say they haven't yet identified any suspects. A third of people who have tried to book an appointment with a GP in the last month say that they've struggled to speak to someone. A major new survey found more than 31% found it difficult or very difficult to contact a GP practice. The figures were roughly the same across people with disabilities or on low incomes, with the northwest of England reporting the worst results. And among those who eventually did manage to book an appointment, 20% reported having a poor experience. Network Rail is to invest £2.8 billion to protect railways from extreme weather following several high-profile faults and delays. The government-owned company says the funds will be used to recruit nearly 400 extra drainage engineers and to train hundreds of operational staff to better interpret weather forecasts. It's after several incidents of delays and faults, including thousands of passengers who were stuck for hours on trains near Paddington Station in December without power due to a fault with overhead wires. A teacher in Birmingham has been banned indefinitely from teaching after he described girls from Western backgrounds as lunatics and said that Muslims will take over. An investigation found that Aqib Khan undermined fundamental British values of individual liberty and mutual respect. Our West Midlands reporter Jack Carson has been outside Mr Khan's former school, Harborne Academy.
The Teaching Regulation Agency has found that he committed unacceptable professional conduct which including calling westernised girls lunatics and also sharing a topless photo to a group chat which included students. Now, the panel did consider the workload and stress of his life as a teacher, but found his actions to be calculated and motivated. He can appeal the order to the High Court from March 2026.
Well, we've heard today that Royal Mail is pushing the postal regulator Ofcom to speed up reforms, including cutting back on second-class deliveries to just 3 days a week. The Postal Service says those urgent reforms are needed to cut costs following a major drop in demand, falling from some 20 billion letters a year to just 7 billion. The plan, set to save £300 million, would also lead to a possible 1,000 redundancies. The Liberal Democrats are among many who've criticised the proposal, and they're warning it would create a postage cost crisis for consumers. And the King is set to open Balmoral Castle to the public this summer, giving curious visitors a rare glimpse inside the royal estate. It's the first time the public would be allowed inside since the original castle was purchased by Queen Victoria and Prince Albert in 1852. Guided tours will offer a peek inside the ballroom and a look at the King's collection of watercolours and even outfits worn by the royals. Tickets, though, start at £100 and they are likely to sell out fast, with just 40 available each day. For the latest stories, do sign up to GB News Alerts. Just scan the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. For now, though, it's back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 8 minutes past 12. Now, 3 British aid workers have been killed after being hit by an Israeli missile strike.
Yes, James Henderson, 33, John Chapman, 57, who both served in the Royal Marines, were named alongside James Kirby, a former Army rifleman and sniper marksman.
Well, the tragic developments have been condemned internationally. Here, Rishi Sunak said that the deaths appalled him and that the situation in Gaza is increasingly intolerable.
Well, joining us now for the latest is our Home and Security Editor, Mark White. Mark, remind us of what exactly we know about what took place and also the political reaction to this.
Well, this was an event that took place in central Gaza on Monday evening, where this charity World Central Kitchen had been taking deliveries of 100 tonnes of aid supplies from a ship that had come from Cyprus, had just dropped those supplies off at a warehouse and was heading back to their home base when these vehicles were struck, all 3 vehicles struck by Israeli missiles, and some 7 members of that charity, including those 3 British nationals, were killed in this atrocity. The 3 British members of that team were all ex-military. They were there as safety and security advisors to the charity, and part of their job was to liaise with the Israeli military, which the charity said they did and they do every time they go out. They work these, what they call deconflicted routes, so that there is hopefully little chance of them being targeted by the Israeli military. But something clearly went catastrophically wrong, and all 3 vehicles were struck and these 7 members of that charity killed. We've just been hearing in the last hour or so from the UK Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, out in Brussels at the moment, who has welcomed an urgent and transparent investigation by Israel. He says that needs to happen very, very quickly. And in tandem with that, Israel, he says, also has to get moving on getting more in the way of aid supplies into Gaza. He has been assured, Lord Cameron says, that Israel is working towards getting some 500 trucks into Gaza. But Lord Cameron also said, we've heard that before, those promises from Israel before that have not been borne out this time. Israel really needs to move to ensure that aid supplies get in, but also that the aid workers who are in Gaza are kept more secure in the job that they're doing, because it is the most dangerous place in the world for aid workers to work at the moment. Some 200 aid workers have been killed since this war began.
It is a really shocking set of scenarios, Mark. I wonder, what are the Israelis saying in terms of why this aid convoy was targeted? These 3 cars that were demarked as aid cars, that were demarked by the World Food Kitchen. Now, this is an organisation that has had no affiliation with any sort of terror group. In fact, it was an organisation that the Israelis worked with themselves, one that provided food to Jewish people who were attacked on October the 7th. It's extraordinary that these 3 cars were seemingly targeted.
Yes, and because this charity was the first to go in and to help out people that were caught up in the atrocities on the Israeli side on the 7th of October. It's a charity that is well regarded, well respected by the Israeli government. And we heard that in a lot of the tributes that came out from Israeli military figures and senior politicians, including the Prime Minister, alongside, of course, the very sorrowful messages that were coming out, the tone of deep regret for what had happened. Israel has put its hands up and acknowledged what was a terrible mistake here. What exactly motivated these strikes is still to be determined. It seems to have been a breakdown in the intelligence that the Israeli military were presented with. So that will have to come out. As a matter of urgency, the Israelis have said they will try to get to the bottom of this. But in the meantime, of course, they've got to try to reassure World Central Kitchen and other charities who have suspended operations in Gaza since these deaths on Monday night, and they've got to come up with a better way of trying to secure that trying to ensure that these aid workers are secure when they carry out the jobs that they're doing. But the difficulty is, you know, even though we can talk about deconflicted zones in Gaza, it's a hot mess there. There's nowhere in Gaza that is truly safe.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Mark White, our Home and Security Editor. We'll speak to you a little bit later on as well. But what should the UK government's response to this be? There are calls now from some senior politicians to at least pause or suspend arms sales to Israel. Is that right? Would that be the right thing to do? Joining us now to discuss this is Conservative MP and member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Henry Smith. Henry, are you sensing a change here in terms of Western support, British support for Israel, the right to defend itself as a nation? We are, as I just said, hearing calls for Britain and other Western nations to suspend arms sales to Israel. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the Foreign Secretary is right. These were a dreadful attack on innocent British civilians who were trying to bring aid to people who need it, civilians in Gaza. And Israel does have a right to defend itself. Hamas started this conflict. They still need to release those hostages. But Israel has to act with responsibility. It can't just respond militarily without care and due attention. And I think what we have seen is a somewhat careless attitude of the IDF, which has now resulted in the death of these aid workers. And that's why it's absolutely right that the Israeli ambassador was brought in, summoned to speak to the Foreign Minister Andrew Mitchell yesterday evening in London, and also that the British government is demanding, quite rightly, that there be a transparent and swift investigation as to what went wrong. Because ultimately, if Israel continue to act carelessly in terms of its military operations, all it does is radicalize more people, both in Gaza and around the world, and that ultimately isn't good for Israeli
Henry, what
security.
what about the issue of arms sales? Because there are senior politicians and security advisors saying that now is the time to suspend arms sales, or at least consider it. It could be that that it was a British-funded British missile that took out these British aid workers. That is a possibility.
Well, that's why we need this very rapid and thorough and transparent investigation. British arms exports are the most ethically assessed anywhere in the world. I used to sit on the Arms Export Control Committee of Parliament that assessed where and how we send weapons around the world. And I think no other country does so in as stringent as manner as we do. And so, yes, absolutely, every case of arms exports does need to be properly investigated and looked at, and I would expect no different for any arms going to Israel. I am very conscious that the defence industry in this country is a high employment important contributor to our economy, and far rather that an ethical country like the United Kingdom is supplying arms than some, shall we say, less than desirable regimes elsewhere in the world.
Henry, on October the 7th, the world was shocked. It was the largest slaughter of Jewish people since the Holocaust. And we saw reactions from politicians across the spectrum in the UK stand behind Israel, say Israel has every right to now go into Gaza and rid this evil, this Hamas threat. I wonder, though, perhaps did we take our eye off the ball when we did that and sort of shrouded by this sense of the need for retribution, the need for justice, perhaps entered into a frame of mind whereby Israel could do no wrong. And that was wrong, wasn't it?
Well, I think pretty quickly after October the 7th, people were starting to criticise Israel quite strongly in terms of their response. I don't think Israel has gotten away with a sort of carte blanche response to the Hamas attacks. Hamas does need to be removed. It needs to be destroyed. It is a terror organisation. It terrorises its own people as much as it seeks to terrorise the Israelis and export terror abroad elsewhere. Those hostages, many of them are still being held with appalling stories of abuse. They need to be fully released. Israel does have a right to defend itself. But as I said earlier on, it doesn't have a right, as no country has a right to defend itself without due care and attention to the civilian population. And I was with some members of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Gaza border area just a few weeks ago, and great care is being taken in terms of the aid that is being delivered into Gaza from Egypt and now from the jetty that's been established from the Mediterranean Sea coast. Great care is taken to make sure that, unlike as in the past, where some aid was used and redeployed by Hamas for military purposes, great effort is being taken to make sure that no, electronic systems are being allowed in that could be deployed for military use by Hamas. So, Israel does have a responsibility to make sure that those innocent civilians caught up in this conflict are protected. And sadly, I think this is a bit of a wake-up call moment for that.
A wake-up call moment. Well, Henry Smith, Tory MP and member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, really thank you for your time here on Good Afternoon Britain.
Yes, thank you very much. And you've been getting in touch, so we will get to some of your views, all sorts of different opinions on this one, how the UK should react, should arms sales be paused? Has your view changed on all this? But
yes, now police in Scotland received nearly 4,000 complaints within the first 24 hours of the new hate crime laws being brought into place. That, of course, came in on Monday, and there were some very, very prominent examples of people, not least the author J.K. Rowling, daring the Scottish police to arrest her for perceived breaches of these new laws.
Yes, she did. She very much dared the police to arrest her. Come to me with the handcuffs. And she says she will defend any woman who is caught up with the police or the police choose to go after them. She'll defend low-profile women who may be caught out misgendering someone, because that could be a crime in Scotland.
Of course, yesterday we learnt that the police said they would not be going after J.K. Rowling for the tweets that she made. But what the police have yet to answer is, although they've said this will not be registered as a crime, will not be further investigated as a crime, of course everything must be investigated now under this law, what they haven't said is whether or not this was logged as a non-crime hate incident.
Yes. We don't know yet if it's been logged as a non-crime hate incident, which is that rather Orwellian thing. But this is Murdo Fraser here who we're going to be speaking to. He says, so I hear that Police Scotland are not responding to journalists' requests as to whether the complaints against J.K. Rowling are recorded as non-crime hate incidents, in line with their unlawful policy, he says. Why so coy, Police Scotland?
Well, why so coy? Let's speak to the senior Scottish Conservative politician, the member of the Scottish Parliament, Murdo Fraser, who joins us now. Murdo, you, of course, yourself have run into some of these bizarre non-crime hate incident logs before. Why do you think Police Scotland are not revealing what has happened in this instance?
Well, potentially, I suspect, because it's very embarrassing for them. And just as they don't want to take on a figure as high profile and as wealthy as J.K. Rowling, in relation to things she's posted on social media, deliberately, provocative messages she's put on social media in relation to the gender issue, I think they're nervous about now confirming that they are complying with their own policy, which was applied in my case in relation to something that I posted back in November that was critical of Scottish Government gender policies. And I find it very strange that they are not prepared to confirm publicly that they're applying their own policy. But there's another twist to this that perhaps is even more interesting, because it's not just J.K. Rowling who's been subject to complaints by members of the public under the Hate Crime Act. The First Minister, Hamza Yousaf, has also had complaints against him in relation to a speech he made in Parliament back in 2020, which some people have claimed was stirring up race hatred. Now, that's not my view, and the police have said, in his case, there was no criminality. However, if the police are applying the policy that applied to me, those complaints need to be logged as non-crime hate incidents. Otherwise, the police are taking a different view in relation to an opposition politician compared to the one they're taking in relation to an SNP First Minister. And that really would not be tenable. So we could end up in the situation where Police Scotland are recording a statement of the First Minister of Scotland as being a hate incident. This is Alice through the looking glass stuff. It's just totally bizarre and shows what a confused mess this whole position has become.
What a dinner party that would be. Murdo Fraser, J.K. Rowling and Hamza Yousaf all on the non-crime hate incident roster.
Yeah, well, Murdo, I want to ask you about how this affects the people of Scotland more broadly. 3,800 complaints or thereabouts in 24 hours since these hate crime laws came into effect. That is quite incredible. Are the people of Scotland physically less safe as a result of these new laws? Since how much time is this going to take away from police resources when they could be fighting physical crimes, for example, violent crimes?
Well, I think that is precisely the point, because if the police have had 4,000 or close on 4,000 complaints in 48 hours. They have said they will investigate each and every one. That will be taking up a huge amount of police time and resource. And this is at a time when Police Scotland told us just a few weeks ago they don't have the resources to investigate minor crimes where there might be a lack of sufficiency of evidence. So already police numbers in Scotland are down. The police are struggling for resources. They can't investigate minor crimes. And here they are deluged with a whole new set of crimes or alleged crimes that they've said they're going to prioritise. That's not what people in Scotland want to see from their police force. They want to see the police tackling real crimes, not what people like J.K. Rowling are saying on social media.
No, and our reporter was out and about in Glasgow yesterday asking the public. He couldn't find one person who agreed with this law. And someone said, I want to get a T-shirt saying, what do you think? That's the scariest question in Scotland, or a question you're not allowed to be asked anyway.
Yes, no, it was really, really striking. He really tried to get an opposing view and couldn't find one. Murdo Fraser, thank you very much for joining us. I think it's important to note that on this Humza Yousaf speech, where he sort of went through all these different senior positions in Scotland, saying this person's white, that person's white, that person's white. Well, I've been looking at the results from Audit Scotland. Do you know the percentage of people in Scotland that record themselves as being white?
Well, it's something about 92% or 90%.
It's 95.4%. 95.4%. Perhaps it's unsurprising, Humza Yousaf, that a large number of people in senior positions happen to be white in a country that is, according to Audit Scotland, 95.4% white.
Well, my strong view is that that was a bigoted speech and it was an absolute disgrace. And, yes, he should apologise for it.
Do you think it should be logged as a non-crime hate
but he should
incident?
apologise for it. He should apologise it. I doubt he has. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I will be fascinated to learn whether or not Police Scotland will apply the same rules to Humza Yousaf as they did to Murdo Fraser, who we were just speaking to. Will Humza Yousaf's speech be logged as a non-crime hate incident? I mean, I completely agree with you, Emily. I don't think it should be. No police service should be logging what people say as hate incidents. But if it doesn't, then that's some real large questions to ask over how the government is treated in Scotland versus opposition politicians.
Yeah, but I'm delighted that J.K. Rowling is going to be very willing to go to all lengths possible to, well, essentially show these laws up for what they are.
And she will
totally
be
unpoliceable, totally ridiculous, and also you can't possibly go to jail, get a criminal offence for misgendering someone, which is what she's trying to point out.
Yeah, it's important to note what J.K. Rowling has said here, because this is significant for anyone in Scotland who is fearful of this law. On a post on Twitter, she said, I hope every woman in Scotland who wishes to speak up will be reassured by her actions. Now, that is a really interesting point in that if anyone in Scotland, if any woman says something that might be deemed as hateful under this Act, J.K. Rowling will say precisely the same and perhaps take the legal repercussions. That is a powerful speech shield that the Harry Potter author is providing there.
Right, yes, indeed it is. Let us know what you make of this. Over 3,000, nearly 4,000 complaints in just 24 hours to Police Scotland. Surely Police Scotland has other priorities. I imagine if I was a regular police officer in Scotland, I'd be absolutely furious about the amount of time and resources this law and these laws will take up.
And that's almost 4,000 number. That was just in the first 24 hours. There have now been 3 days of this law applying in Scotland, with more media coverage off the back of what happened on Monday. I would reckon that the Tuesday number for these complaints will be even greater. And if there is this sort of snowball effect of complaints, some real, some frankly troublemaking complaints, just how much time is this sucking away from what the police should perhaps, in the eyes of most ordinary people, what they should be doing? Well, coming up, we'll be looking at a shocking new poll that reveals 3/4 of GPs working for the NHS want to go on strike. What's all that about? Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
Very good afternoon from the GB newsroom. Just after 12:30, the headlines. The Foreign Secretary is calling on Israel to reduce the risk of airstrikes hitting innocent victims, like the attack which killed 3 British aid workers in Gaza. Lord Cameron has said their deaths are dreadful. John Chapman, James Henderson and James Kirby were delivering vital food supplies when their convoy was hit. The 3 men were part of a group of 7 aid workers from the World Central Kitchen. The charity says their movements had been coordinated with Israel's military before setting off in 2 armoured cars that was marked with the NGO's logo. Second-class postal deliveries could be cut to just 3 days a week. That's as part of reforms being pushed by Royal Mail. The Postal Service says urgent reforms are needed to cut costs following a major drop in demand. The plan, set to save around £300 million, would also lead to a possible 1,000 redundancies. The Liberal Democrats are among many who have criticised that proposal, warning it could create a postage cost crisis for consumers. A third of people who have tried to book an appointment with a GP in the last month say that they've struggled to speak to someone. A major new survey found more than 31% found it difficult or very difficult to contact a GP practice. And among those who did eventually manage to book an appointment, 20% say they had a poor experience. And if you've ever wanted to find out what it's like to live like a king, well, now's your chance. Balmoral Castle is opening to the public, giving curious visitors a rare glimpse inside the royal estate. Guided tours will offer a peek inside the ballroom and a look at the King's collection of watercolours and outfits worn by the royals. Tickets, though, they start at £100 and they're likely to sell fast, with just 40 on offer each day. For the latest stories, do sign up to GB News Alerts. You can just scan the QR code on your screen or visit our website, gbnews.com/alerts.
Well, it's 12:32. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. Please do keep your views coming in. We'll be getting to some of those, particularly on the killing of 3 British aid workers, asking you whether you think the mood has changed. Has your view changed on the situation in Gaza? But we're going to move on to something a little bit different, because a shocking new poll has come out and it reveals that 3/4 of GPs working for the NHS want to go on strike. Now, they're citing pay, funding, burnout and stress as the main reasons for it.
Yes, the Doctors' Union, the BMA, says that the profession was tired of being bullied and gaslit, with reports that they were considering timing a strike during the expected autumn general election.
Well, we can now speak with health writer Roy Lilly. Roy, do GPs really have that bad a time of it?
Well, I mean, I think the answer to that is yes and no. It's a complicated situation. In the last 10 years, 1 in 5 GP practices have closed, which obviously is not good. And we get over 90% of our first contacts with the NHS for under 11% of the NHS budget. And that's fundamentally their argument. They're doing about 1.4 million consultations a day across primary care, which is a huge record, much higher than it was before COVID. So they are under a lot of pressure, it's true. There's been a kind of a foul up as well in the way that they're being funded. To try and take some of the pressure off of GPs and for us to see other allied health professionals like physiotherapists, nutritionists and pharmacists and things like that, the government made some ring fence money available where they could hire in other health professionals, but not GPs. Now, what has happened is that a lot of the practices have been hit by huge inflation for their utilities, because we have to remember that GP practices are small businesses. They're not owned by the NHS. These are people who contract for services. So they're running their businesses. They've been hit by inflation. A lot of them are working at the margins. And whilst this money is available to get other allied health professionals working with them, the money's not available. They can't use it to hire GPs. So now we've got the curious situation where practices can't afford to hire GPs, and we've got stories of GPs working as Uber drivers and not being able to get a job as a GP. And at the same time, there's money available for other health professionals. And the GPs want this ring fence money to be changed so they can hire more GPs. And there's no question about it. They're under an enormous amount of pressure. As a result of that, the BMA, of course, which has had the junior doctors on strike, it's had the consultants on strike. I mean, there's a kind of appetite in the BMA for more strikes. The problem with that is, though, as I said a moment or two ago, GP practices are small businesses. And so if a GP goes on strike, he's going on strike against himself, really. So whilst I fully accept that, 3/4 of GPs have had it up to here and they're saying, we're going to go on strike, whether or not they will is another issue. So the whole thing is just a desperately badly managed muddle.
Roy, do we need to change the way in which we talk about the BMA? Because so often they talk of themselves as some sort of medical group, but they're a trade union. They are led by trade unionists. Yeah. They have been very, very political rather than medical, it could be argued, talking about doing this strike during a general election, or even in August last year, when the co-chair of the junior doctors wing of the BMA said in an interview that they wouldn't agree the same deal that stopped strikes in Scotland, they wouldn't agree that in England because it would be agreeing with Tories. This is a deeply political union.
Yes, I agree. I mean, the BMA used to be a kind of cosy gentleman's club, really, and everything was done very discreetly. But there's been a big change in the leadership of the BMA. Now the BMA is run by much younger doctors. It's a small group that really, in rather the same way that Momentum took over the Labour Party, so this group of younger doctors have taken over key positions in the BMA. I think I'm right in saying now they occupy the chairs of all of the regional groupings of the BMA. They dominate the council of the BMA, and they're much more radical. I mean, you know, in my day, no one would ever have thought a doctor would have gone on strike, but now we've had endless strikes. We've had GPs, we've had junior doctors going on strike for over a year, and no settlement is in strike. It is in sight. So there's no question about it. The whole tone and texture of the BMA has changed. They are much more militant, much more aggressive.
I mean, Roy, getting back to the GPs themselves complaining about their working conditions, I can't get my head around it. I'm sorry, the most GPs seem to work part-time. There are statistics to back that up. They get paid considerable salaries. If they're working part-time, they have time for family life. They have time to take on other types of jobs. I can't understand why on earth any GP would even think about taking away their work and going on strike.
Well, it's not quite right. There is now a predominance of female GPs working in primary care. And of course, you know, women are principal carers with families and what have you, and a lot of them find it convenient to be able to work part-time and work with their families as well. Part-time for GPs is well over 30 hours a week, so it's not just like popping in 1 or 2 days a week. And as far as the salary is concerned, they don't actually get paid a salary. GPs have drawings on the difference between the cost of running the practice and the income. And they have what they call drawings. And there's no doubt about it. I mean, you know, there is. I mean, I think the GPs occupy a very important and privileged place in our society. And I hark back really to the days when we had family practice, where you knew who your doctor would be. And you could go and talk with him. You got a relationship. He knew who you were, probably who your mum was, and all of that is very important, I think, in family doctoring. These days, you have trouble ringing up and getting an appointment, and you're very likely to get an appointment with a Zumba class more than you are likely to see a GP.
Things have changed.
I mean, the whole process has changed, and it's become much more industrialised, and we've lost the personal touch, I think, which is a shame.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts on all of that, Roy Lilly, health writer. I just can't muster up that much sympathy.
I think it is hard when you know that the average wage in the country is around £30,000 a year, and you see GPs well into the six figures, you see consultants well beyond the six figures, and you just think, is there a sense of proportion that can be brought in?
Is this not one of the big problems, that so many of our GPs are going part-time quite quickly, which means that it's probably more expensive, and it also is a cost on resources? I don't know, are you allowed to say that? That perhaps it's not a good thing that everyone's part-time. But anyway, let us know what you make. Do you think GPs have cause to go on strike? I mean, everyone else is. But coming up, is Sir Keir Starmer embarking on a war against NIMBYism? Apparently he is the man to build back Britain better, whatever his new slogan
Boris
might be.
Johnson's slogans now. This is, of
Levelling
course,
up.
not in my backyardism. The phenomenon of preventing new construction. Will Labour take that on? Could Labour get Britain building? Well, we'll look to that after the break. But yes, much more to come. Do stay with us.
The latest GB News travel.
London bound on the M26, there is a lane closure and queue in traffic for 2 miles to a broken down lorry just before the M25. Clockwise on the M25, traffic is easing following an earlier accident at 1B for Dartford. Northbound on the M5, a lane closure and emergency repairs between 26 for Wellington to Taunton at 25. Traffic is coping well through the lane closure, and the M48-7 bridge open at the moment in case the bridge needs to close. There is a lane closure to strong winds between Chepstow at 2 to 1 for Ost. It is also 40 miles an hour for safety. And the southbound side of the M6, there are longer lanes and 2 lanes closed to an overturned vehicle from 20 for the Lim interchange to Knutsford at 19. Delays to the Croft interchange at 21A.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Let's see what you've been saying at home. You're very vexed about these China cyber attacks. Colin says, what the hell is our Secret Service doing? They've only just realised what China's up to. You just couldn't make it up.
We could have told you.
We knew. We're not surprised. So Colin, we agree with you. Quite why it's taken GCHQ or MI6 or whoever it is, MI5, it would be MI5 to know what's going on.
And Rod has said, thank you, Rod, if you know how you vote, if they know how you vote, coupled with mass data held also on you, do you not believe they can influence your decision-making process in any way? They won't know.
I'm not sure they know how you vote because that's
not on record anyway, is it?
It is not.
And Ken says these are only able to be carried out because of computers, internet, mobile phones, etc. It seems to me that these inventions are ruining our lives, and therefore we were much safer and much happier without these inventions. There is a school of thought that would agree with that, Ken, very much so.
I sort of often think it myself, really.
Me too.
The dark web. I mean, how many people have been murdered because of the dark web?
You do wonder as well.
Brianna Jai.
Yeah, you do wonder. I look at my kids' generation and I wonder whether they will grow up and have a complete rejection of all of this, and they will just say enough, because they will think we were all insane for having become so addicted to our phones. I wonder whether, as a generation after generation do, they will reject it. Wayne, blame Western governments for the rise of China. People were saying this 10 years ago and every country ignored it. That is a really good point, Wayne, because we've taken Chinese investment, and obviously our houses are full of items we bought from made in China.
And if you remember as well, we had to get them out of the 5G. Huawei.
We did.
Get them out, literally extricate them from
that was at least one thing I think they did quite well.
Yeah.
And Jan says if they've seen the electoral roll, what else have they been looking at? That's the threat to our democracy. They never do things by halves. I'm much more worried about my own government looking at what I do online, to be fair.
Why don't you say, go back, we said before, the electoral roll is a public document which you can access if you go to your library.
It's 12:44. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. Now, at the top of the show, we were asking your views on whether your views have changed towards Israel and the war on Gaza, the war in Gaza. This, of course, in light of the deaths of 3 British aid workers by IDF strikes. Adam says, war is war. There will be mistakes. And that's a view that has been echoed in our inbox. Lots of people saying it's a dangerous war zone. This will happen. The IDF didn't deliberately do this. Others not taking such a generous view.
Yeah, Jeff has written in to say, if we stop arming Israel, surely we have to stop sales to Ukraine or Saudi Arabia or anyone who'll actually use the weapons of destruction. I suppose there is a point there, Emily, that this is potentially a domino effect. I mean, war is horrible. You sell arms to someone, they're going to use the arms.
Well, quite. And Peter says, Israel's fighting terrorism and we must continue to support them. Hamas still have 150 hostages, which seems to be forgotten. It is a tragic accident, but Israel must learn from the tragedy and carry on. Now, a lot of people who have been against Israel for a long time, since this broke out, essentially, have argued that Israel is trigger-happy, have argued that the IDF is not careful when it comes to the loss of civilian lives. And an incident like this certainly does bolster that argument, whether you think that's fair or not.
Yeah, I have a problem with this word, an accident, because it could be that sort of the targeting was an accident, perhaps. But it doesn't sound all that accidental when one van was hit, people got out of the van and went to the next van, which was then hit, and 3 in a row these vans were hit.
Yeah. And that makes people think it was deliberate in one way or another. Patrick says the mistaken killing of aid workers, so he clearly thinks it was a mistake, is like friendly fire incidents in other wars, tragic, but not a cause for changing our support of Israel in defending its very existence. But, you know, Australia, Poland, Canada have all come out very strongly to condemn this. Of course, they had people as well who unfortunately have been killed.
Yes, but perhaps we can wrap it up with just what Kelly has said, and this really does bring it home, I think. It sums up the whole situation. All Gaza needs to do is release the hostages. If Hamas released those hostages, this war would be over.
Do you think it would be?
I think there's a strong argument to say that...
The goal is to annihilate Hamas.
It's true, but I think that there would undoubtedly be a ceasefire. The pressure from the United States and Britain and everyone else would be insurmountable if the hostages were released.
Well, keep your views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.com. But we're going to turn our attention to Sir Keir Starmer, because he's apparently embarking on a war against NIMBYism. So, although not in my backyarders, he's going to be launching his war. The Labour leader is targeting dozens of seats where people are significantly more pro-development, more pro-housing than the average.
Yes, it marks one of the clearest divides, perhaps, in this debate, at least in rhetoric terms, between the Conservatives. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is facing criticism from his own backbenchers after scrapping those mandatory house-building targets and saying that no building should ever happen on the Green Belt. Sir Keir Starmer, on the other hand, says that he would build on the Green Belt.
Right, well, joining us now is Liam Halligan, GB News economics and business editor with On the Money.
Liam, the words "a war on NIMBYism" might sound like gobbledygook to a lot of people. What does it actually mean?
Well, NIMBY is the phrase "not in my backyard." It's sometimes paired with YIMBY, yes, in my backyard. NIMBYs are people characterised, sometimes unfairly, as unreasonably restricting development of housing close to their house, close to their backyard, if you like. And we do have an issue with so-called NIMBYs in this country. We have a situation where often developers can't get planning permission to build homes, not least because of local pressure, because local people are worried they'll have to endure the hassle of house building. There won't be enough new school places, new doctors' places, dentist places, and so on. So there has been a lot of pushback to the idea of house building in this country. We have got a big shortage of homes. Your generation in particular, Tom and Emily, have had a lot of trouble getting on the housing ladder compared to, say, mine. And it's becoming a major political issue. And Labour really want to put what they would characterise as clear red water between themselves and the Tories, saying that they're going to take on the NIMBYs. They're going to push back against local aversion to house building. The Tories much, much more cautious when it comes to this subject.
Liam, is this just a reflection of where Labour gets its votes and where the Conservatives get their votes? Lots of people in the Shires, for example, who might vote Conservative don't want an awful lot of development, in general, of course, and perhaps Labour more urban seats do.
That's right. That's certainly the sort of political characterisations. I'd say the economic geometry, the political geometry is starting to shift now. Yes, it's true, lots of people don't want house building in their own backyards, but even people from relatively wealthy families now, they're seeing that their kids, their grandkids can't get on the housing ladder the same way that they did. And so Labour's trying to tap into the idea there's a generational shift happening, particularly lots of younger people, but also their older parents and grandparents now worried that a whole generation of British people have been locked out of the housing market, often at crucial family-forming ages. This is now affecting our fertility as a country. Just a few little factoids here. Labour are emphasising this part of their offer to the electorate. No real specifics yet, but it's just mood music. Labour are saying that housing is the top issue now in 25 of their 100 most winnable seats. So potentially as the cost of living crisis eases a little bit, housing will come back to the fore as, if not the top issue, then certainly one of the top issues that impact voters. Labour's saying it can't meet housing need without using the Green Belt. So Labour really is touching a third rail of British politics there, saying it will build on the Green Belt. The Green Belt actually is 13% of the landmass of the UK. It's a huge area. Labour are saying that a dearth of housing is no good for growth. And this is true. Where is growth going to come from in the economy? Well, growth often comes from house building, and we've had slow house building in the last decade or so, and indeed we've had slow growth. A lot of people would say that's not a coincidence. The Tories, for their part, they accuse Labour in this time-honoured phrase of tarmacking over the Green Belt. I would just add, Tom and Emily, as a point of fact, that the Green Belt isn't actually getting smaller, it's getting bigger and bigger. The Green Belt, by total size, by total acreage, is now more than twice the size of what it was back in the late 1970s, as local councils have added to it year in, year out. A lot of people will say that NIMBYism is rational. A lot of people would say that why put up with all the hassle of local house building when you're not going to get any more local infrastructure? What Labour are trying to do, and it's not anything that the Tories haven't talked about in the past as well, is to say with new housing comes new infrastructure, comes new schools, comes new hospitals, in a way to try and tackle that NIMBYism. But look, it may be that the cost of living clouds are clearing a little bit. We had a very low inflation number yesterday, unofficial 1.3%. But as and when the cost of living crisis ease, just remember, you've still got issues like immigration and indeed housing that are going to dominate this general election.
Liam, that statistic is absolutely fascinating. I know you've charted the growth of the Green Belt in your book, but it is just remarkable to think. I don't think the average, even well-informed voter would think that the Green Belt has actually been growing rather than shrinking.
Tom, I would put serious money on the fact that less than 5% of MPs in the House of Commons would know that the Green Belt has actually grown considerably by about 150%. It's more than doubled in size since the late 1970s. It's just not what you want, the political narrative that MPs want to put out there. But it is true, and a lot of the Green Belt, by the way, is just worthless urban scrub of no aesthetic value whatsoever. And the Green Belt is completely separate from areas of outstanding natural beauty and national parks and all the rest of it. And some of it is indeed aesthetically valuable, but lots of it isn't. And a lot of people would say that the Green Belt is just a way of stopping houses being built where people want to live. And a lot of people would say that that's fundamentally undemocratic and unfair.
Well, we certainly need more houses. Thank you very much indeed for bringing us that, Liam Halligan, our business and economics editor. Well, it's certainly going to appeal to millennials and the Gen Z who are desperate to get on the housing ladder.
Yeah, and
any party who says we're actually going to build, whether they do in practice, we shall see.
And I think one of the big problems here, though, is that the Labour Party say they want to build. They say they want these new towns, this project of new towns. They're not telling us where the towns will be.
That's a bit tricky, isn't it?
And unless they tell us where the towns are going to be before the election, they might just run up into the same problem that Boris Johnson faced. He tried to reform planning and it got defeated in Parliament.
Yes, well, I'm sure lots of people are getting in touch saying there are just far too many people. We wouldn't need all these houses if there weren't so many people.
We would still need more, because families are different and people are divorcing.
Yeah, people are all living on their own, yes.
Yeah.
But we've got lots more to come. We're going to be returning to our main story of the show, of course, the deaths of British aid workers in Gaza. But we're also going to be asking an interesting debate, an interesting question. We'll be having the debate. Should parents be fined for taking their kids out of school just for a holiday? This seems to be happening more and more. Let us know what you think. This is Good Afternoon Britain.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. There will be some quite persistent rain, particularly across the northeast through the rest of the day, but further south it will turn much drier. However, further rain will arrive into the southwest this evening. That's as a result of this approaching weather front. But for now, we've got this lingering weather front that will bring persistent heavy rain to parts of southern Scotland, northeast England in particular, but also many areas of eastern Scotland. It's also quite a cold wind here. Further south, it will turn much drier. It will stay largely cloudy, but I think across across the south coast, that's where there's the best chance of seeing any sunny breaks this afternoon. It won't feel too bad in any sheltered sunshine, highs of 16 degrees across the southeast this afternoon. Through this evening, it should stay dry for central areas, but another batch of rain will arrive into the southwest later on, and that will push northeastwards throughout the night, bringing many areas of the Midlands quite a damp night. And then a second band of rain arrives into the southwest through the early hours. This one could turn quite heavy and will bring some quite persistent, long-lived heavy rain. So that could bring some tricky travelling conditions for those of you that are travelling on Thursday morning across the southwest, but also into parts of the Midlands and then through the southeast as well. Further north and elsewhere across many areas of the UK, it will turn much drier through the day, and where it's been quite damp recently across the northeast, it will be a much drier day on Thursday. Still largely cloudy, but there will be some sunny breaks here and there, and in the sunshine we'll see highs of 15 or 16 degrees. That's all for now. See you later.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You could win our biggest prize giveaway so far. First, there's an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. Plus, courtesy of Variety Cruises, a bespoke 7-night small boat cruise for two worth £10,000. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, your next holiday could be on us. Choose any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and find your home at sea. We'll also send you packing with these luxury travel gifts. For a chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Dewbs & Co. Weekdays from 6 p.m.
You think this country needs new gas power stations? Apparently, this will all be about trying to get some form of energy security. Rishi Sunak has upset people today with this suggestion, people saying that actually this would do more damage to climate change than it would do good. Where are you on it, Richard?
I'll tell you exactly where we need a lot more gas power stations and nuclear power stations, because quite often the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. Last week, we imported 16% of all our electricity because we haven't got enough capacity in the UK, and we're now totally over-reliant on renewables.
The part of the problem is the lack of storage capacity, which the government has finally got round to addressing. I think this as backup is actually quite a sensible idea. But they are not doing anything, as far as I can tell. At the moment, it will be retrofitted to have storage capability, which seems to be utterly bonkers. I mean, anyone who's got solar panels, you know very well you're storing up energy. So it's about storage as much as production. They could have gone, 20 years ago, we could have had nuclear power. We could have done more. We haven't looked far enough ahead in the future, and we are in grave danger of making the same mistake. I mean, the other side of this is, what is the difference going to be? Blackouts are, they're irritating and... Irritating?
It'd be disastrous. It would destroy our economy.
Well, they would be now, but, some of us remember 3-day weeks and things like that. And in fact, I grew up thinking that everybody had, at least a couple of days a week when they had to eat off a primer stove and things.
This is, again, I don't want to harp on, but this is one of the problems in the politics in our country, isn't it? So many politicians, they just think in election cycles. Absolutely. They just think, what can I do and say to get my own backside re-elected at the next general election? They're not always looking ahead. Actually, politics aside, what is genuinely the best thing for this country?
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Wednesday, the 3rd of April.
As 3 Brits are killed in an Israeli airstrike on their aid convoy, calls are mounting for Britain to suspend arms sales to Israel. Could the deaths of John Chapman, James Henderson and James Kirby prove to be a watershed moment in this war? We'll speak to a spokesperson of the Israeli government this hour.
And should parents be fined for taking their kids out of school just to take them on holiday? That's our debate this hour. We'll hear rather passionate arguments on both sides of that one.
And a teacher in Birmingham has been sacked for undermining British values after claiming Islam will take over and westernised girls are lunatics. How could such a man be allowed to teach for quite so long?
Well, should we fine kids? Should schools fine parents for taking their children out just to go on holiday? Do you know what? I feel quite strongly that it is a selfish thing to do. Now, I know the state does not own your children and you should be allowed to do anything you like with your children within reason. But it does seem to me awfully selfish for the other children in the class, for the teachers who then have to catch them up. And yes, lots of parents say, oh, but they learn so much more on our trip to, for a safari, or they learn so much more going to Tenerife for the week. But do they? Do they really?
Certainly not on the curriculum. I'm a big believer in extracurricular work and learning things that aren't necessarily sort of stipulated by the state.
Yeah.
But it does seem that they're sort of cheating the system by taking kids out of school. And that's not good for sort of social connections, for friends, for sort of being part of a class group.
I'm not really sure, holidays are so much cheaper during term time is really an adequate justification, is it really? Oh, it's so expensive to go on holiday during the holidays. Well, that's just how it is, isn't it, if you have children?
Yeah, and I suppose there's a reason why everyone needs to take a holiday at the same time. That's an advantage, I suppose.
What do you think? gbviews@gbnews.com. Do you think actually parents work hard? They may not be able to afford a holiday during the school holidays because we know how expensive it gets, not least with flights and everything else, hotels and whatnot. So perhaps it's justified. Perhaps parents should be able to do whatever they like and certainly should not be fined.
But is it the case that parents who take their children away during school time rather than school holiday are going on the cheapest holiday they could possibly find? Or is it actually they're going on a slightly fancier holiday than they could afford if they went during holiday time?
You might be right on that one. Let us know what you think. Should parents be fined for taking their children out on term time? It's your headlines now.
A very good afternoon to you. 3 minutes past 1. The headlines this lunchtime. The family of British aid worker John Chapman, who was killed by an Israeli airstrike in Gaza, say he will be forever a hero and that he died trying to help people. Mr. Chapman, along with James Henderson and James Kirby, were delivering vital food supplies in the region when their convoy was hit. They were part of a group of 7 aid workers from the World Central Kitchen. The charity says they had coordinated their movements with Israel's military before setting off in 2 armoured cars marked with the NGO's logo. Well, Foreign Secretary Lord David Cameron says more still needs to be done to make sure aid workers are kept safe.
I welcome what the Israeli Foreign Minister said yesterday to me about a full, urgent and transparent inquiry into how this dreadful event was allowed to happen. And we want to see that happen very, very quickly. I also welcome the fact that he spoke about much more aid getting into Gaza, up to 500 trucks a day. That is essential. We've been promised these things before, and this really needs to happen.
There are growing international calls to hold Israel to account for those deaths of the aid workers. The leader of the Liberal Democrats, Ed Davey, says the government should suspend the supply of arms.
It does look like Israel has broken humanitarian law, and we really shouldn't be exporting arms to any country that breaks international humanitarian law. And the Democrats have been calling for a long time for immediate bilateral ceasefire. The Israelis have not listened to international pressure on that. And so I think by ending British arms exports to Israel, it will send a very, very powerful signal.
In other news, a third of people who have tried to book an appointment with a GP in the last month say that they've struggled to speak to someone. A major new survey found more than 31% found it either difficult or very difficult to contact a GP practice. The figures were roughly the same across people with disabilities or on low incomes, with the northwest of England reporting the worst results. And among those who did eventually manage to book an appointment, 20% say they had a poor experience. Network Rail is to invest £2.8 billion in protecting railways from extreme weather, following several high-profile faults and delays. The government-owned company says the funds will be used to recruit nearly 400 extra drainage engineers and to train hundreds of operational staff so they can better interpret weather forecasts. It's after several cases of delays and faults, including thousands of passengers who were stuck for hours on trains near Paddington Station in December without power due to a fault with overhead wires. 9 people are now known to have died and more than 800 injured after an earthquake in Taiwan. It was the biggest quake there in 25 years. If you're watching on television, this was the moment that the quake hit the East Coast. Well, those tremors were recorded as high as 7.7 in magnitude at around 8 o'clock this morning local time. As many people were heading to work and to school, emergency services in Taiwan are now trying to rescue as many survivors as they can. We understand more than 100 are trapped in tunnels, under buildings or stuck under landslides. A teacher who described girls from Western backgrounds as lunatics has been banned from teaching indefinitely. An investigation found Akib Khan, who's from Birmingham, told students that those who support feminism would be, he said, replaced by Muslims. It's understood he also sent topless pictures of himself to messaging groups that included some students. The Teaching Regulation Agency says Mr Khan engaged in serious misconduct and undermined what have been described as fundamental British values. Royal Mail is pushing the postal regulator to speed up reforms, including cutting back on second-class deliveries to just 3 days a week. The Postal Service says urgent reforms are needed to cut the costs, following a major drop in demand, falling from some 20 billion letters a year to 7 billion. The plan, set to save £300 million, would also lead to a possible 1,000 job losses. The Liberal Democrats are among many who've criticised those proposals, and they're warning it would create a postage cost crisis for consumers. Excuse me. And the King will open Balmoral Castle to the public this summer, giving curious visitors a rare glimpse inside the royal castle. It's the first time the public has been allowed inside the original castle since it was purchased by Queen Victoria and Prince Albert in 1852. Those guided tours will offer a peek inside the ballroom and a look at the King's collection of watercolours and even some outfits worn by the royals. Tickets come at a price just £100 and they're likely to sell fast, with just 40 available each day. For the latest stories, do sign up to GB News Alerts. Just scan the code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 8 minutes past 1. And 3 British aid workers have been killed after being hit by an Israeli missile strike.
Yes, James Henderson, 33, John Chapman, 57, who both served in the Royal Marines, were named alongside James Kirby, a former Army rifleman and sniper marksman.
Now, these tragic developments have been condemned internationally. Here, Rishi Sunak has said the deaths appalled him. Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron said that he'll be watching very closely to make sure a transparent inquiry happens very quickly. But let's get the latest with our Home and Security editor, Mark White. Mark, what precisely happened here?
Well, according to Israel, it was an unintended strike, a mistake that they've put their hands up to, and they say that they are carrying out a rapid, a rapid and transparent investigation to determine exactly what led to these mistakes being made. But 3 of the convoy's vehicles struck by missiles on Monday evening after those aid workers had just picked up a shipment of about 100 tons of aid that had been transferred from Cyprus and were heading back to their main base of operations from that warehouse. Now, what happens in all of these journeys that they undertake in a war zone is they liaise with the IDF, the Israeli military, to tell them exactly where they're going, what time they're going, what route they're taking, the vehicles involved, etc. That, the charity said, was done, but still this terrible mistake happened, and that will need to be got to the bottom of. And we heard from the UK Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, today, who welcomed this, what he says would be a transparent and he hopes a very, very quick inquiry. He also welcomed assurances from the Israeli government that more aid would go into Gaza. He was told that the Israeli government was aiming to put 500 trucks a day into Gaza, but Lord Cameron warned that, you know, we've heard those promises from Israel before, and they have yet to be realised.
Mark, should we trust the IDF, the Israeli Defence Force, to investigate itself?
Well, it's a good question. There will be many out there who absolutely do not trust the Israeli military to carry out a full and transparent investigation into this. They point to other incidents where aid workers have been killed in recent months and say that there has been no apparent inquiry that has been of any consequence with regard to those incidents. However, the British government, a key ally, the US, a key ally, Australia also allies, and others who have a vested interest in this will be pushing the Israeli government to ensure that this inquiry is both quick and fully transparent. And as I say, in tandem with that, they are really ramping up the pressure now on the Israeli government to start being serious about providing proper security procedures for those aid workers who are in Gaza. It is currently the most dangerous place on earth for aid agencies to operate in. 200 plus aid workers have been killed since this war began.
Mark White, thank you for bringing us those details. Now, what's the Israeli government doing to ensure aid workers are safe going forward? Joining us now from Tel Aviv is Israeli government spokesperson David Menzer. And David, these cars were from the World Centre Kitchen, an organisation that has helped Israelis in the aftermath of the terrible attacks of October. Indeed, this is an organisation that the Israeli government has praised and that logged this journey with Israel as well. And still it was struck.
Yes, that is correct. It is an absolute tragedy. We've had apologies this morning already from the Chief of Staff, Halevi, but together with that, we've had expressions of grief and apologies from our President, our Prime Minister, and other members of the government. This is a tragedy. It was a case of mistaken identity. The initial report, which Chief of Staff Halevi released this morning, said that this was a terrible mistake. You are absolutely right that WCK are a very important partner. You know, these guys are some of the unsung heroes in this conflict, not just here, but around the world, because they do such important work going to important places. Look, I want to make a couple of very important points, if I may. Firstly, many hundreds of these deliveries are made all the time. So this is an unfortunate case, I would say, and the IDF has already said that we're reviewing our strategy. But also to say, you know, the reason, and let me just share with you the dilemma which Israel has right now. We're trying to get as much aid into Gaza as we possibly can, but we also know that Hamas themselves are stealing the aid, are looting the aid, are selling it onto the black market for vastly increased prices. So, and the other thing I want to share with you is that, you know, there's one thing you can be sure of, and that's that no one in Hamas is hungry. So this is a terrible occurrence. We're making changes to make sure that it doesn't happen again. We grieve with these families as well. You know, these are the unsung heroes. These are the good guys in this conflict. They're trying to help the people that need the aid the most. But the most important thing is Israel must be allowed to finish the job, to finish Hamas, so we can return to peace in the region.
David, this route that these aid workers were on was approved by the Israeli Defence Forces. Can we trust the IDF, who have apologised? They say it's a grave mistake. Can we trust them to investigate themselves and what happened here in a transparent way? Because looking from the descriptions that we have, it seems almost deliberate.
I mean, that's just a slur to say that it's deliberate. We've got no interest in that happening. First things first, we all remember here in Israel that WCK were one of the first organizations on the ground that supported Israelis themselves, when we had that heinous attack on October the 7th, when the Hamas terrorists burst through our borders with a rampage of hatred and beheading and murder and rape. WCK themselves helped us. So none of us, that's not lost on anyone, which makes the situation all the more tragic. The Chief of Staff has already said that changes will be made. He's already released his preliminary results. We're not saying that this was anyone else, unfortunately. This is a tragic case of mistaken identity.
David, it's hard to think of an army in the world that has more technology, that has a greater precision strike capability, that has more information, frankly, than the Israeli army. Israel is a tech superpower and has proven time and time again of its advancement in this area. Why then 3 trucks marked as World Centre Kitchen trucks, not struck at the same time, but struck sequentially, one after the other after the other? Are you seriously trying to say that the strike here went awry, that the IDF didn't know, couldn't see what the vans said?
Look, first things first, this is a war zone. I don't know if you understand that. There is a terrible war going on in Gaza. It's not a war that we started, a war that we wanted, but it is a war that we will pursue to the end. This is a war zone. Mistakes happen in war. That is not a justification. That is a fact.
Oh, have we lost David there? That's a shame. But a fantastic point that you make there. From the description of events that we have, it seems carelessness at best, deliberately at worst.
Yeah, I find it very hard to understand why this could be a mistake. I mean, it could possibly be a rogue individual within the IDF. That would make sense. But these were 3. It wasn't one explosion. This was an attack, and then a bit of time, and then the next car, an attack, and the next car, an attack on an approved route. I mean, Emily, I suppose Israel has to publish every element of this investigation.
Yes, absolutely. And the IDF has come out strongly to say we will have a full, thorough, transparent investigation, but will the international community trust the findings after this that's happened? Of course, lots of people getting in touch to say that Israel still needs our support in their battle against Hamas, against a terrorist organisation that carried out some of the worst atrocities against their nation not that long ago, only on October the 7th.
6
but
months.
Looking at this, you do have so many people now coming out, prominent people who haven't gone this far previously, now coming out to say we should pause arms sales to Israel. Is that fair? Is that fair?
I suppose the big question, though, is if it isn't Israel doing the investigation here, who is it? We know that there are elements within the UN that have been sympathetic or indeed that have been Hamas themselves. I don't think anyone would trust the UN doing this investigation. Could it be a neutral third-party country? But what country is neutral?
What country is neutral on this conflict? I doubt there is. Are there any countries that are completely neutral on this conflict, Tom? I don't know, but
I'd like to think that, I mean, if anyone's been abstaining a lot in the UN, it's been us at the moment. But my goodness, it does seem like it's a very hard circle to square at a time of war.
And of course, it's true what David says there, that this is a war zone and it is highly likely that civilians will die. But as you said, they are known for their precision. They are known for the intelligence that they have and their high-spec technology, let's say. Are they being far too trigger-happy?
Yeah. I mean, if this was a convoy, I hate to say it.
They clearly thought there was someone from Hamas in there, or at least that's the explanation.
But if this was a UN convoy that hadn't been pre-registered with the Israelis, I could understand them believing that that could be sort of a cover for Hamas, that there might be someone from Hamas in one of those vans, because it's been proven that Hamas have worked within elements of the UN. But the reason that the Israeli government works with World Centre Kitchen is because they precisely have nothing to do with Hamas. They've gone out and saved Israelis. They are completely, as David Menzer was saying, the good guys.
Yeah, they trusted them. They trusted them, and the 3 British men who have died, have been killed as a result of this, been described as heroes. Truly sad, truly
Veterans
tragic.
to a man as well.
One of them, reportedly, was about to leave Gaza the next day. So devastating, absolutely devastating, seeing those faces up there. Not much else to say really on that, but keep your views coming in. gbviews@gbnews.com. What do you make of the what the government spokesperson for Israel had to say?
Well, don't go anywhere, because up next we're hosting one of our debates this hour.
Gear change.
Should parents be fined for taking their kids out of school for a holiday? We know lots of you have thoughts on that. Get them in, gbviews@gbnews.com. But that debate up next.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
One more story in. Milton Keynes, absolute chaos in the city. 300-odd youths arrested, or at least involved in a
stampede.
A stampede. Yeah, what's been going on?
A stampede through the...
there we are.
This is the video. So this is a stampede through a shopping centre in Milton Keynes. I think, Amy, you live there, don't you? You live nearby.
For those on radio, we can see literally hundreds, scores of kids.
I think there are about 300 kids.
Are they in school uniforms?
Yeah, quite a
This is as they've broken up from school, presumably.
Security tried to intervene. They've been accused of being heavy-handed. But I think this speaks to the fact that the landscape of youth services has just been decimated, and there's literally nothing for kids.
So hang on, whoa. You think that this has happened because social services have been diluted?
Youth services.
This is because there's no police around, there's no oversight, there's no deterrent, and 300 kids think that they can run through a shopping centre, frightening shoppers out of their lives.
Going to a shopping centre.
Amy, sorry, my kids would not be behaving like that because there's no ping pong available at the local
Aren't your kids like
youth
age
centre.
4 and 5? These are teenagers, and our teenagers are headed into a world where there are no leisure services. There are
nothing to do with crime.
It has
If we up the ante on
everything to do-
basketball, it's not going to stop kids being stabbed on the street.
What creates antisocial behaviour is having nothing to do.
It's lack of discipline
being
in the home,
alienated.
lack of discipline in the home, and lack of policing on the
What did
streets,
you
and a judiciary and a penal system that is utterly liberal.
You're going right to the end of the line. What about the preventative measures?
What about the people that these people affect by running through a shopping centre and stampeding? When there's mothers with kids in prams frightened out of their lives, and we're worried about the social services
I'm
aspect
talking about
that's
carrot.
perhaps led
You're
to it.
talking about stick, right?
Yeah. So how long does your solution take to resolve it? Mine takes about 30 seconds. More police, bang them up. Yours...
Russell, should parents be fined?
More police, bang them up.
Absolutely, and the kids should be taken to task.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Now, we speak to you, of course, in the middle of the Easter holidays. And last month, the government increased the fine for missing school from £60 to £80 for longer than a 5-day absence, with the threat of prosecution if it isn't paid, in part of their new attendance drive to stop children from missing school.
An attendance drive. Well, one mother decided to take her children out of school for a 10-week trip to Asia. Wow. Chance would be a nice thing, eh? And believes that while their adventure trip won't help with the curriculum, it will definitely have boosted their life education. Yes, I find that holidays boost my life education.
A 10-week trip to Asia.
Sounds rather nice, doesn't it?
That's not about just getting a slightly cheaper flight, is it? That's,
I mean, they may as well have
pulling them out of school.
They may as well have, go the whole hog and just homeschool them at that point. 10 weeks. So should parents be fined for taking kids out of school for a holiday, or is it their right as parents?
Well, joining us now to debate this is maths teacher Bobby Siegel, who does think people should be fined for taking their kids out of school, and GB News presenter Martin Daubney, who's all for taking his children out of school for a holiday.
Excellent.
OK, Martin, I think you've got the tougher challenge here, so we'll let you go first. Why on earth is it right to pull your kids out of school?
Well, I've done it. I took my kids out for a week last summer. Quite simply, the holiday was half the price. I think we should be fining the holiday companies. Parents are just getting fleeced left, right and centre. We're seen as fair game, and they rack the prices up. It's not fair. And also, teachers, they take endless days off through strikes. Where were the teachers during COVID, when I was having to take days off? I think we lost the bond at that point. I filled out the forms, which, by the way, was more complicated than applying for a passport and about as enjoyable as root canal. I filled out the form, I put it in. They didn't even bother to reply. So I played the game, I played the system, didn't get a response, and I think, all things considered, my child has an exemplary attendance record throughout the rest of the year, and I think for 1 week a year, this is me, this is my time. I'll do it again.
Martin, couldn't you have just gone on a shoddier holiday out of term time?
Well, I just like a bargain. I'm tight. I'm a northerner. And it's more to the point. I resent the fact the prices, at the precise moment everyone breaks up, they spiral through the roof. Parents are tired of it. They're very, very familiar with it. And I think if it means breaking the rules every now and then, so be it.
Caps on holidays, eh?
Some might call it supply and demand. But Bobby Siegel, you're a teacher. Why should parents not do this?
Yeah, so usually Martin and I actually sing from the same hymn sheet, but this for once, I'm going to have to disagree with him here. I think that the big picture is, for most pupils, the best place to be during term time is in school, surrounded by the support of their friends and teachers. And it's not just about learning, but their overall well-being, wider development, and mental health. And I understand Martin's points about strikes, and, teachers took strikes. But again, we're not just taking strikes for ourselves. Obviously, that's part of the reason, but it's because teachers believe that strikes mean that the future of education is protected by ensuring the right paying conditions, so there are good teachers, so young people can be educated properly.
It's about pay.
No, but again, if you look at ultimately, why are people leaving the profession? If we want the best education sector, we need to make sure teachers are paid, again, not Lamborghinis and stuff, but paid appropriately and fairly. Actually, on the point about Martin, taking that 1 week off, and again, I sympathise. I have friends who are parents and teachers, and they think, oh gosh, if I could take them a week earlier, I could get good prices. But what I will say is, schools are not like Woolworths. It's not a pick and mix. You can't pick and choose when you want to be in school. If you want to take your children out of school, fine. Be at home school. Don't be in a school curriculum. But I think that being in school, if you're taking kids out, Martin, I'm sorry, but it's disruptive for other students, disruptive for teachers. So I think, unfortunately, there has to be a line drawn. And I'm saying, you take kids out of school in term time, you're going to have to get that slap on the spine.
But Bobby, it's all fair and well for teachers to lecture us about holidays. You get a third of the year off. The only people who get more time off than you is Santa. Well, the rest of us, meanwhile, only get a few weeks off a year, and we get absolutely fleeced on the prices because of supply and demand. You can go on holiday any time of those 3 months you get off. And I say that because my missus is a teacher. Always making me feel guilty because I have to work during half term, like now. So I think teachers lecturing us on when the rest of us are allowed to take holidays, it just doesn't resonate.
Oh, Martin, what if everyone did it? What if everyone did it? It would be absolute chaos.
Well, the teachers could have even more time off, couldn't they? I'm sure they'd be crying into their tea over that one.
Well, let's throw that to Bobby. I mean, it is true. Things are very expensive when everyone goes off school. Understandably, companies need to ration holidays somehow, and they do it by price.
Yes. So I say, like, if you're thinking about solutions to this, it is that potentially all schools don't need to take their leave, their Christmas or their Easter or summer at the same time. Maybe stagger it, like some schools start Christmas a week earlier, some a week later, Easter a week earlier, a week later. So there are other workarounds it. If every single school starts and ends at the same time, yes, we're going to get the issue where everyone's rushing for the door at the same time. But I still think ultimately, as an educator, we need children to be in school at the same time. Because again, I've had students, parents who've taken children out and they've faced a fine. But what that means is if children are missing, let's say we're teaching Pythagoras theorem and that child misses that week or 2 or 3 children, then the next week when they're all back, I have to reteach Pythagoras.
You have to reteach it. Martin, may I just ask, Martin, just a last question. Are you teaching your children to think that they're special and that the rules don't apply?
No, because I think actually there's a serious point here, and that is repeated absenteeism from many kids is rife in schools. It tends to be the same kids, and the parents don't respond to being told off. Like Bobby, I know, will vouch for this. There is a serious problem with kids missing lots and lots of days. They tend to be under-retainers, parents who don't care, and that isn't being clamped down on. Those parents probably couldn't or wouldn't pay a fine if they were approached. So there is a serious issue with absenteeism. But casual absenteeism, the likes of me, I think is a good thing. Because we're thinking with our feet.
Martin. But at least he's not a hypocrite. At least he's not a hypocrite.
Well, we started with Martin, so let's finish with Bobby. Bobby, a final word to you in this debate.
Yeah, so I would say that fines for parents are not to be taken lightly. They are a measure of last resort. Ultimately, people join the teaching profession because we want our young people to be educated and prepared for the future world. If their parents are taking choices to take kids out of school, it makes it much more challenging for us to do our jobs.
Well, there you go. Great stuff. That was a proper head-to-head, wasn't it?
That was.
Proper debate. Good stuff, Martin Tominey and Bobby Seagull. Enjoy those holidays, eh?
Oh, goodness me. You know what? I was completely on Bobby's side until he said, oh, no, it's fine for teachers to strike.
Yeah, and then got you, didn't it?
Suddenly I was like, oh, maybe there's more moral equivalence here. But actually, I do think I'm with my original position. Don't take your kids out of school.
You know what? It's divided the inbox. It's divided the inbox. We're going to get to some of your views very shortly, but we've also got a Royal Mail investigation into stamp fraud, counterfeit stamps. That's after a GBNews report found that some people have been charged £5 for their post. We're going to get to the bottom of all this.
Very good afternoon to you. The headlines just after 1:30. The Foreign Secretary is calling on Israel to reduce the risk of airstrikes hitting innocent victims like the attack which killed 3 British aid workers in Gaza. Lord Cameron says their deaths are dreadful. John Chapman, James Henderson and James Kirby were delivering vital food supplies when their convoy was hit. Those 3 men were part of a group of 7 aid workers from the World Central Kitchen. The charity says their movements had been coordinated with Israel's military before setting off in 2 armoured cars marked with the NGO's logo. A 43-year-old man who committed almost identical sex attacks over a decade apart has today been sentenced to 18 years in prison. Fareed Issa Tariq had been convicted of raping a woman in Swindon in April last year after luring her into a fake taxi. In 2012, he was also given 6 years in jail for a similar crime. Now the Ministry of Justice has been asked for details of what supervision he was under following his release. Second-class postal deliveries could be cut to 3 days a week as part of reforms being pushed by Royal Mail. The Postal Service says urgent changes are needed to cut costs following a major drop in demand. The new plans would save around £300 million, but would also lead to a possible 1,000 redundancies. And a third of people who have tried to book an appointment with a GP in the last month say they've struggled to speak to someone. A major new survey found more than 31% found it difficult or very difficult to contact a GP practice. And among those who did eventually book an appointment, say 20% reported having poor experience. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a look at the markets this afternoon. The pound will buy you $1.2581 and €1.1663. The price of gold is £1,806.70 per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is currently at 7,911 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. There will be some quite persistent rain, particularly across the northeast through the rest of the day, but further south it will turn much drier. However, further rain will arrive into the southwest this evening. That's as a result of this approaching weather front. But for now, we've got this lingering weather front that will bring persistent heavy rain to parts of southern Scotland, northeast England in particular, but also many areas of eastern Scotland. It's also quite a cold wind here. Further south, it will turn much drier. It will stay largely cloudy, but I think across the south coast, that's where there's the best chance of seeing any sunny breaks this afternoon. It won't feel too bad in any sheltered sunshine, highs of 16 degrees across the southeast this afternoon. Through this evening, it should stay dry for central areas, but another batch of rain will arrive into the southwest later on, and that will push northeastwards throughout the night, bringing many areas of the Midlands quite a damp night. And then a second band of rain arrives into the southwest through the early hours. This one could turn quite heavy and will bring some quite persistent, long-lived heavy rain. So that could bring some tricky travelling conditions for those of you that are travelling on Thursday morning across the southwest, but also into parts of the Midlands and then through the southeast as well. Further north and elsewhere across many areas of the UK, it will turn much drier through the day, and where it's been quite damp recently across the northeast, it will be a much drier day on Thursday. Still largely cloudy, but there will be some sunny breaks here and there, and in the sunshine we'll see highs of 15 or 16 degrees. That's all for now. See you later.
The latest GB News travel.
I'm Jules Buckley, heading towards Edinburgh, eastbound M8 at Hermiston Gate. On that roundabout, there's part blocked, there's a breakdown. South Yorkshire, the northbound M1 at 31 for Sheffield, a lane shut on the entry slip, there's a breakdown there as well. Now the southbound M6 in Cheshire struggling, 2 lanes are out. An overturned vehicle from Limit 20 down to Knutsford 19, causing queues back to the Croft interchange at a 21A. There's a fuel spillage there too. Buckinghamshire M1, a lane shut on the slip road around Milton Keynes at 14 for a breakdown. Southbound M11's part blocked before junction for the North Circular and queuing for 3 miles due to a collision. An anti-clock M25, the inside lane's out away from Enfield 25. A 2-mile queue there. It's all due to a broken down lorry. And for now, that's your latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Dewbs & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Right, well, it's 1:38. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. Now, the Royal Mail is investigating issues with new barcoded stamps, and this is all because of a GB News report that found some recipients have been charged £5 for their post.
Well, this comes after GB News found several cases of counterfeit all over the country, which has been purchased from reputable sources. So, fake stamps that have been purchased from seemingly kosher salespeople.
And then when your recipient receives said post, they're bunged with a £5 charge, as you can see with that yellow label, it seems. Well, a spokesperson for the... Oh, no, let's go to our digital finance editor, Jessica Sheldon, who has the story for us. Now, Jessica, you've been doing some digging into this. Tell us what is going on here exactly.
Hi there. So we have spoken to people all over the country who have been experiencing this issue. They've been buying stamps from reputable places, including the post office and small post office stores, and their letter hasn't got there. Rather, it's come through the door saying that the recipient has to pay £5 to get their letter. Compare them with what you look...
Oh, sorry about that. Jessica's line is a little bit jittery.
Yes,
there, we'll come back to Jessica.
We'll fix this microphone issue. But, of course, this is a significant issue because when you expect to send a piece of post, you expect it to be legitimate, especially if you're buying these stamps in a legitimate shop. So it's not just individuals who've been swindled here. It's actually shop owners.
Yeah. The shop owners
traders
themselves.
who've been swindled.
And if you were, if you sent a nice little birthday card to me in the post, birthday's in July, if you sent it in the post and then they couldn't receive it unless they paid £5, you'd be pretty irritated, wouldn't you?
Scary letter to receive saying, pay £5 in order to... what happens if you don't pay that? And also, people will obviously be feeling, is this legitimate?
Yeah.
Has someone just slapped this on? Am I being defrauded myself, or is this actually an issue with the post office? There is so many big questions there.
But this is a GB News exclusive that Jessica brought us after, some people realised that they were being sold these counterfeit stamps, and not everything was as it seems.
No, and you expect systems like this in the United Kingdom to work. But I believe we've got Jessica's microphone working now, digital finance editor at GB News, of course. Jessica, sorry for interrupting you there. Shall we just go to who precisely is it that's being affected by this situation?
Yeah, so people all across the UK have wrote in and told us about this problem. So it's obviously concerning because people are having to go out to the delivery office and pay £5, or you can pay online, but that's not for everyone. And we've also heard from small business owners who have sent out parcels and letters to their customers, and then they've found that the customer has had to pay £5 for the parcel or letter, small letter, which obviously is really concerning for their reputation.
And so tell us, how did you find out? Did you have individuals come to you and say, you need to look into this, Jessica?
Yeah, absolutely. We had a lot of people write into our GB News Money team, which can be contacted at money@gbnews.uk. And we started to see a pattern, so we decided to investigate.
No, that's a really, really important piece of work that you've been doing here, because clearly it's affecting people right across the country, and something that we wouldn't really be able to collate and understand unless we had your journalism here. But frankly, what's the impact of your journalism here? What's happening after these stories that we've published on gbnews.com?
Well, I think it's really important that Royal Mail investigate what's happened and explain what's happened, because, there's going to be a lot of concern about sending post if you've had to pay or a loved one's had to pay £5 for something which you thought was sent with a genuine stamp. I also think it's quite concerning for people who are selling these stamps at post offices. Sub-postmasters are being accused of selling counterfeit stamps. So we really need to find out what's going on, because that's really unfair if there is an issue elsewhere.
Well, that's very true. Lots of little shops on high streets sell post stamps, and they could get into trouble, not least from the people who've bought them. They could be accused of trying to swindle them. Thank you very much, Jessica, for bringing us that exclusive. Digital finance editor Jessica Sheldon there. Now, we do have a response from a spokesman from the Royal Mail. He said...
Royal Mail takes the illegal production of counterfeit stamps seriously. Since the introduction of barcoded stamps, we've been able to significantly reduce stamp fraud through added security features.
Yes, they go on to say, we're working hard to remove counterfeit stamps from circulation. Well, there you go.
Well, if you've had similar problems with stamps, please do get in touch. Email us at money@gbnews.uk. That's money@gbnews.uk. We're very keen to hear from you.
I bought some stamps the other day. Now I'm a bit worried. Hopefully they're not counterfeit.
Do you know what this is, actually? Because stamps never used to have the barcodes. How many stamps were we previously using for decades and decades that were all counterfeit, perhaps?
Fake ones.
We might have unwittingly been used non-barcode fake stamps for a long, long time, and now it's got the barcodes, suddenly people are being tripped up.
Well, yeah, let us know at home if you've been affected by this. Clearly it's something that's going on across the country. The Royal Mail has been forced to investigate this, but coming up, we're going to be discussing a potential return to the UK next month from none other than the Duchess of Sussex.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, would you welcome her back with open arms? That coming up after this.
Britain's newsroom. Weekday mornings from 9:30.
Is it OK to call people fat? I won't call Bev fat because she isn't. She won't call me fat because I'm not. But the fitness fanatic, Derek Evans, you might know him better as 90s icon Mr Motivator, recently told a podcast diabetes have gone through the roof. You should be able to call people fat.
Well, he joins us now. Good morning, Derek. Good morning.
Good morning.
Great to see you. So I think what you're getting at is this idea that we've become so polite about weight that we're ignoring the elephant in the room. If you'll forgive the phraseology there, and actually sometimes you've got to be cruel to be kind.
Well, actually, this has been taken out of all context. I actually didn't say you're entitled to call people fat. What I did say is that in the 80s and 90s, I remember the way I got into television, there was a gentleman walking at reception while I was waiting for the people I was training. And for some reason, I got up and I prodded him in the belly. And I said to him, you need to deal with that. That was fat. We have a nation where obesity, diabetes is killing every one of us. And unless we take responsibility for our health, rather than waiting for government to do this, government to do that, it is our responsibility, right, to look after our independence and our health. And as we get older, it's even more critical, right? And that's why I'm here as an example saying to you, listen, I'm 71 years of age and movement is medicine. And you can't sit around watching television and not going out to the gym or wherever. You will never, ever be able to look after your family and everything you've worked for. You will lose it. I've never seen a deposit account behind a hearse. No matter what you work for, the most important thing you can do with your life is every hour, do something active. Every hour.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio, and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's just coming up to 10 to 2. And I have to say, a lot of you have been getting in touch about the debate that we had. Should you pull your kids out of school to get a cheaper holiday? And should those that do be fined?
Should they be fined? Well, Susan says, hi, I do think you should be able to take an additional 2-week holiday break out of term time, 2 weeks. Holidays are important with family and educational. The educational system just needs to change holiday times. Yes, I guess if everyone had slightly different holidays, it might work, but then how would that work around Christmas and Easter? I mean, it just wouldn't, would it?
And you do need certain times of the year that everyone has off. That's sort of a community-wide thing. John says that parents taking children out of school teaches them that if you don't like following the rules, ignore them. And we've already got too many completely self-centred people in this country.
Well, that was the point I was trying to get to with Martin, because Martin is quite a stickler for the rules. He's not. I think he thinks that authority is a good thing in society, and I think he likes law and order, and for things to be quite regimented in some aspects. He's not here to actually defend that, but he may be watching. So this is interesting that he doesn't take that approach when it comes to taking kids out for holiday.
No, maybe he's been an anti-authoritarian all along.
A little bit of an anarchist is Martin.
Although Carol says, as long as it's once a year, I think it's extremely important the family can have a holiday together and spend that quality time together. That means taking time away in terms, so be it.
Well, you know what, I think most people clearly probably do it, and that's why there's quite a lot of emails coming in saying that they do. Well, there's a lot of supportive ones, and I thought that more people would be against children being pulled out during term time. Beth says, I think it's very sad that many people cannot afford to take their children on holiday during term time, but instead of punishing the parents, we should be blaming the holiday industry for raising prices so high during the school holidays. Of course they're going to raise the prices. Of course they're going to.
Whereas Heather says parents should be fined if they take their children out of school. It causes disruption for the whole class because when they come back, the teacher must take time out from teaching the rest of the class. And
Would you take your child out of school during term time?
I don't think I would.
No?
I don't think I would. Because ultimately, let's be real, it's not the choice of going on holiday or not going on holiday for the parents that take their kids out. It's going on a really expensive holiday versus going on a slightly cheaper holiday.
Do you think?
Just do a cheaper holiday.
Do you think? Oh, yeah, well. In other news, Meghan Markle has appeared in public for the first time since Princess Kate's diagnosis with cancer.
Yes, the Duchess of Sussex visited Los Angeles Children's Hospital, leading a reading session. Here are the latest pictures for those watching on television. It comes as she prepares herself to return to the UK next month.
Feels a bit COVID era, doesn't it, those pictures with the masks? But I guess if she's in a children's hospital, all precautions must be taken. But joining us now is former royal correspondent at The Sun, Charles Ray. Charles, do you think Meghan is planning a little return to the UK, and would you welcome it?
I believe it when I see it. When I see her step off that plane, I do not believe that she will be here. I think too much has gone on. And I'm sure that if she does come, she will get a very cuddly and warm welcome.
Why do you have such scepticism there, Charles?
Well, you just got to look at the last few years, Tom, and see what the Sussexes have done with their continued criticisms of the royal family and the fact that we've heard before that she doesn't want to come back to this country. And in actual fact, the organisers of the event on May the 8th for the Invictus Games church service, they've only got her name penciled in as a TBC. Now, you would have thought if she was serious about coming here, we know Harry is coming, you'd have thought if she was serious about coming here, we'd already know that she was coming here. And if she does come here, is she going to bring the children? I mean, Harry's still up in the air about his security. He thinks that Britain is the most unsafest country in the world. He's clearly not remembered what it's like in the United States. So I'm sceptical that she's ever going to set foot in this country again.
Well, that's an issue, isn't it? Not just her relationship with this country, but that security provision, which very much is not sorted. Do you think, we heard that it's costing the taxpayer £500,000. He had an estimated bill of £1 million for all the legal advice and help he got. Which way do you think that's going to go in the end?
Well, at the moment, he's considering appealing yet again on that issue. So that's going to add to the public purse, a few more pounds in the coffers. I don't know when I don't think this guy knows when to stop. And I mean, how many times does he need to be told? He's no longer a member of the royal family. Sorry, no longer a member of the working royal family. So therefore is not entitled to have the police protection that are afforded to the royal family, which you and I pay for, and the viewers and the listeners. So if he comes here, he's clearly rich enough to pay for his own security. A private security. They're not allowed to carry guns. They won't have the same access to the background information about who's going on, what's going on, and what dangers there are. But when if he comes here and is with or sees members of the royal family, he will be covered by the police protection that is around the royal family in any case.
That's true.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point. I still am amazed that they went to live in California. Perhaps I shouldn't be amazed, but I thought they originally said they wanted to go and live in Canada, at least within the Commonwealth, at least under the Crown. But
no glitz and glamour. Well, not as much glitz and glamour, not as many opportunities to join up with Spotify and the Netflix. Charles, we're going to have to leave it there. Oh, he's frozen anyway. Charles Ray, thank you very much indeed, former royal correspondent at The Sun. You know what, I'm not convinced Meghan Markle wants to return to the UK. Let's be real here. She's having quite a nice time in California, is she not?
Well, I don't know. She has to wear... seemingly being forced to wear a mask in that hospital. I don't know. I mean, maybe that is the standard protocol.
Is that common practice? I don't know.
I do know that in some American states there are still some mask mandates over the...
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, there you go, throwback. But coming up, Police Scotland received nearly 4,000 complaints within the first 24 hours of the new hate crime laws coming into place. I mean, that is quite extraordinary. We'll be discussing that and much more very shortly.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. There will be some quite persistent rain, particularly across the northeast through the rest of the day, but further south it will turn much drier. However, further rain will arrive into the southwest this evening. That's as a result of this approaching weather front. But for now, we've got this lingering weather front that will bring persistent heavy rain to parts of southern Scotland, northeast England in particular, but also many areas of eastern Scotland. It's also quite a cold wind here. Further south, it will turn much drier. It will stay largely cloudy, but I think across the south coast, that's where there's the best chance of seeing any sunny breaks this afternoon. It won't feel too bad in any sheltered sunshine, highs of 16 degrees across the southeast this afternoon. Through this evening, it should stay dry for central areas, but another batch of rain will arrive into the southwest later on, and that will push northeastwards throughout the night, bringing many areas of the Midlands quite a damp night. And then a second band of rain arrives into the southwest through the early hours. This one could turn quite heavy and will bring some quite persistent, long-lived heavy rain. So that could bring some tricky travelling conditions for those of you that are travelling on Thursday morning across the southwest, but also into parts of the Midlands and then through the southeast as well. Further north and elsewhere across many areas of the UK, it will turn much drier through the day, and where it's been quite damp recently across the northeast, it will be a much drier day on Thursday. Still largely cloudy, but there will be some sunny breaks here and there, and in the sunshine we'll see highs of 15 or 16 degrees. That's all for now. See you later.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
With thanks to Variety Cruises, a family company sailing since 1942, you have the chance to win a £10,000 7-night small boat cruise for two. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, you'll be able to choose from any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and explore Greece like never before. Plus, you'll also win £10,000 in tax-free cash to make your summer sizzle. And we'll pack you off with these luxury travel gifts. For a chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Dubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Wednesday, the 3rd of April.
As 3 Brits are killed in an Israeli strike on their aid convoy, calls are mounting for Britain to suspend arms sales to Israel. Could the deaths of John Chapman, James Henderson and James Kirby prove to be a watershed moment in the war? We'll get the view from Israel.
Overwhelmed. Scottish police have received thousands of hate crime referrals since the SNP's new speech laws came into effect this week. Even First Minister Hamza Yousaf has himself now been reported to the police. We'll have all the details.
And a teacher in Birmingham has been sacked for undermining British values after claiming Islam will take over and that westernised girls are lunatics. How could such a man be allowed to teach for quite so long? Well, lots of you have been getting in touch. We spoke to an Israeli Israeli government spokesperson earlier on in the show, and he reminded us that Gaza is a war zone and essentially said mistakes happen. Because that's what he said, essentially. Mistakes happen. And some of you seem to take that view, seem to accept that.
Yeah.
Others, not so much.
Patrick says the mistaken killing of aid workers in Israel is likely friendly fire. Incidents in other wars, tragic, but not a cause for changing support for Israel in defending its very existence.
Yes, and we're hearing that the SNP Westminster leader, Stephen Flynn, who has been very vocal about this war, has called for an immediate recall of Parliament following these airstrikes on Gaza aid workers. But Joe says the key to kick-starting ceasefire negotiations in the war is the immediate release of all hostages. And that is a strong point. Would that end the death and destruction in Gaza?
It's interesting. Stephen Flynn, the Westminster leader of the SNP, he always talks on foreign policy.
Yeah, he always.
In his 2 questions he gets every Prime Minister's questions, it's always a foreign policy question. It's almost trying to sort of say, look, what Scotland could do were it's independent, because it's one of the few things that the Scottish government can't do is foreign policy. And so he's always, on every single foreign policy issue, trying to get Parliament recalled, trying to sort of pick up the role of the SNP.
Yes, I wonder if I were based in Scotland, whether I'd want every question asked by Stephen Flynn to be about foreign affairs, but perhaps he's representing his voters. But get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.com. We're going to be speaking to an Israeli reporter, journalist out in Israel to get the perspective on what the Israeli press is saying about all this. But let's get your headlines.
Tom and Emily, thank you very much, and very good afternoon to you. It's just after 2 o'clock. The top story this afternoon: the family of British aid worker John Chapman, who was killed by an Israeli airstrike in Gaza, say he will forever be a hero and that he died trying to help people. The bodies of Mr Chapman, along with James Henderson and James Kirby, are now being transported to leave Gaza. Those 3 British nationals died when their convoy was hit as they were delivering vital food supplies. They were part of a larger group of 7 aid workers from the World Central Kitchen NGO. Foreign Secretary Lord David Cameron says more needs to be done to make sure aid workers are kept safe.
I welcome what the Israeli Foreign Minister said yesterday to me about a full, urgent and transparent inquiry into how this dreadful event was allowed to happen. And we want to see that happen very, very quickly. I also welcome the fact that he spoke about much more aid getting into Gaza, up to 500 trucks a day. That is essential. We've been promised these things before, and this really needs to happen.
Well, there are growing international calls to hold Israel account for the deaths of those 7 aid workers. Here in the UK, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey, says the government should suspend the supply of arms.
It does look like Israel has broken humanitarian law, and we really shouldn't be exporting arms to any country that breaks international humanitarian law. And the Democrats have been calling for a long time for immediate bilateral ceasefire. The Israelis have not listened to international pressure on that, and so I think by ending British arms exports to Israel, it will send a very, very powerful signal.
Turning now to Finland, where police say a 12-year-old boy suspected of carrying out a shooting at a school yesterday had been bullied, which officers are treating as the motive. Another student, also aged 12, died in that shooting, which happened in a suburb of the capital, Helsinki. 2 girls of the same age, both 12, were also seriously hurt. It's understood a permit for the handgun used in the shooting used to belong to a relative of the suspect. Next to an update on the situation in Taiwan, where we now know that 9 people have died and more than 800 injured after a major earthquake, the biggest quake there in 25 years. If you're watching on television, this was the moment that the quake hit the East Coast. Well, as you can see there, those tremors were recorded as high as 7.7 in magnitude at around 8 o'clock this morning, just as people were heading to work and taking their children to school. Rescue teams are now working into the night in search of any survivors. More than 100 are thought to be trapped in tunnels under buildings or still stuck under landslides. A 43-year-old man who committed almost identical sex attacks over a decade apart has today been sentenced to 18 years in prison. Farid Issa Tariq had been convicted of raping a woman in Swindon in April last year after luring her into a fake taxi. In 2012, he was given 6 years in jail for a similar crime. The Ministry of Justice has now been asked for details of what supervision he was under following his release. A teacher who described girls from Western backgrounds as lunatics has been banned from teaching indefinitely. An investigation found Akib Khan, who's from Birmingham, told students that those who support feminism would be, he said, replaced by Muslims. It's also understood that he sent topless pictures of himself to messaging groups that included students. The Teaching Regulation Agency says Mr Khan engaged in serious misconduct and undermined what were described as fundamental British values. A third of people who have tried to book an appointment with a GP in the last month say that they've struggled to speak to someone. A major new survey found more than 31% found it either very difficult or difficult to contact a GP practice. The figures were roughly the same across people with disabilities or on low incomes, with the northwest of England reporting the worst results. And among those who eventually did book an appointment, 20% report having a poor experience. And the Royal Mail is pushing the postal regulator to speed up reforms, including cutting back on second-class deliveries to just 3 days a week. The Postal Service says urgent reforms are needed to cut costs following a major drop in demand, falling from 20 billion letters a year to just 7 billion. The plan, set to save £300 million, would also lead to a possible 1,000 redundancies. The Liberal Democrats are among many who've criticised those proposals, warning it could create a postage cost crisis for consumers. For the latest stories, do sign up to GB News Alerts. Just scan the code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now, though, let's get more from Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 8 minutes past 2. Now, 3 British aid workers have been killed after being hit by an Israeli missile strike.
Yes, James Henderson, 33, John Chapman, 57, who both served in the Royal Marines, were named alongside James Kirby, a former Army rifleman and sniper marksman.
Well, the family of John Chapman have said he will forever be a hero, adding he died trying to help people.
Well, let's get the latest with our Home and Security editor, Mark White. Mark, interested in the political reaction to what's happened, this tragic incident. We're hearing lots of prominent politicians talking about ceasing arms sales to Israel, a recall of Parliament. Is there a sense that something's changed?
Yeah, I mean, the prominent politicians are not in government, though, and I don't think
that is going to change the policy towards the way in which Britain and other countries are allies to Israel, and the way in which they will arm Israel in their efforts to go after the likes of Hamas. But what is true is there is now a great deal of pressure on Israel in the manner that it's conducting the war, and that pressure now coming from key allies, including the US, the UK, Australia, of course, who lost a national in the terrible events of Monday night as well. Calls not just for a rapid and transparent investigation into what on earth went wrong on Monday night, but also a renewed effort and impetus on the part of Israel to get aid supplies moving in Gaza again, and to ensure that those aid workers who are working in what is the most dangerous territory in the world now for humanitarian aid workers, to ensure that they have an enhanced level of security, something they haven't had thus far, with, we're told, up to 200 aid workers being killed since the start of this war.
It's so tragic to look at the cases here. The fact that, according to some reports, the first van was hit and some people survived that and ran out into the next van that was then hit. And so, again, with the third van. It's very hard to see how this was accidental.
Well, certainly those are the questions that will have to be answered by the Israeli military. They've described it as a misidentification, but that doesn't really explain how the order was given not just to strike one vehicle, but then after that to strike a second vehicle and then a third vehicle. So those are very serious and difficult questions that the Israelis have to answer. They've promised that this will be transparent. They will be pressured to do just that by key allies like the US and the UK. But yes, some very difficult questions. I mean, the truth of it, of course, is in that area generally, it is a real hot mess. It is a war zone. And even the supposedly safer areas, these corridors, which have been described as deconflicted, where aid charities can work in tandem with the IDF to give them routes, to give them times that their vehicles will be on these routes and descriptions of the vehicles that are being used. With all that, it's still very confusing. This incident, of course, happened at night, and although people are saying, well, the vehicles were very clearly marked, with at least one of them having the logo of the World Central Kitchen on the roof of a vehicle, it was at night. You wouldn't be able to see a painted logo at night.
And Mark, some are saying that this is an example of how the Israeli Defence Force can be indiscriminate with its shelling. Is that fair?
Well, I think in the fullness of time, in terms of this investigation, we'll know whether this was indiscriminate, whether it was a complete and catastrophic blunder, whether it was the deliberate targeting of intelligence, because there are some reports out suggesting that intelligence was there, that a Hamas terrorist was in that convoy for some reason, and that's why it was targeted, and that those people in the convoy were seen as collateral damage. Now, that would be massively damaging to the Israeli government if that actually was the truth of it at the end of the day. So we rely on them to be as transparent as possible in this investigation. But it is, I think, it's difficult, there's no doubt, for the Israeli government and the military out there trying to conduct a war in what is still a built-up area where you have an enemy combatant that actually melts into the civilian population. It is enormously difficult to tell one from the other, and as a consequence, you will see civilian casualties at a significantly higher rate than you would perhaps in some more conventional conflicts.
It's a really important point to emphasise there. Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, appreciate your time on this. Thank you.
Yes, there is a tendency for people to leap to conclusions without examining all the evidence here. But what's been the reaction in Israel itself? Let's speak to Israeli journalist Yotam Confino. Yotam, thank you very much for joining us on the show. How is the press covering this? I know there have been protests against Benjamin Netanyahu and the way that he is conducting this war. Will that increase?
Well, first of all, the protests are more against Netanyahu and his failure, first of all, to take responsibility for preventing October the 7th from happening, and also failing to get the hostages out. With regards to this particular strike that killed the 7 aid workers, I don't think anyone in Israel disputes the fact that this was a tragedy, that this should have never happened, and that a professional army should not be able to make such a mistake. Now, there are some discussions about whether this was just amateurish or if anyone had gone rogue and simply just was trigger happy. There are some in the media that have quoted senior defense officials saying that some of these commanders really just do what they want. Now, of course, this is a media report. It's from one of the left-wing newspapers, but nevertheless, this is an incident that should not have happened. And it's not the first incident in Gaza where the Israeli army has failed to live up to its own rules of engagement. One of the other tragic stories was when they killed 3 unarmed hostages who were not wearing a shirt and waving a white flag. So it's just one of a couple of very serious incidents that one can only hope that they'll get to the bottom of, because this is not how the IDF should conduct itself.
And it's just so disappointing and disheartening for people that do see themselves as friends of Israel, who do think that Israel is a beacon of light and democracy in such a troubled part of the world, who recognise that the IDF is one of the most technologically advanced armies in the world. Israel prides itself on its technological advancement, of course, and yet such a basic error. This is not something that you would have expected to be possible from an army as sophisticated as the IDF.
Exactly. It's one of the conundrums here in Israel. In fact, in general, Israel is often referred to as the high-tech nation because of its technological advantages. But there are several things in Israel that I can surely tell you are not highly technologically advanced. So it's very difficult to get a full picture of how the IDF is precisely conducting itself inside Gaza, mainly because journalists are not in there. Western journalists and foreign journalists in general are not in there. So it's very hard for us to really understand what's going on. I do want to say one thing, though. I do think that for all of its flaws, Israel is normally also held to a completely different standard than most other countries. If you look at what's happening inside Gaza now, you have a terrorist organization holding women and children hostage, 180 days. Some of them are being sexually assaulted. Very, very little is being talked about this. But when Israel makes a mistake, the entire world rallies because it's easy to point fingers, and rightly so. But there are so many levels of this war that have been neglected, that haven't been covered properly. Al-Shifa Hospital is one of them, where Hamas and Islamic Jihad was basically, again, using a hospital for military purposes. The WHO, many other organizations have not condemned that. What they're doing is that they're condemning Israel for removing Hamas and Islamic Jihad from the hospital. So, in general, it's a very difficult war for Israel to come out of successfully, simply because people are waiting for Israel to slip up, and when they do, they get a hammer in the head.
It's a very important point that you make, and there's a lot of truth to that, I'm sure, in the way this war is being covered by some broadcasters and newspapers. But I'm just interested to know, how can Israel gain the confidence of the international community when it comes to this? Because, as you may have seen, for example, prominent politicians in Britain are now discussing whether we should suspend, pause arms sales to Israel off the back of it. They're talking about recalling Parliament to discuss this, calls for an immediate ceasefire and so on. Where does this go?
First of all, it's quite interesting to mention what the politicians are saying publicly and what they're saying behind closed doors. I have several sources saying that what the allies are telling Israel behind closed doors is very different from what they're saying publicly. First of all, they don't criticize Israel in the way that they do publicly at all. In fact, they fully support Israel in more or less everything that they're doing. But publicly, some of the Western leaders are under immense pressure. Look at London. You have hundreds of thousands of people marching every single week, chanting genocide, calling on the government to cut ties with Israel. They can't ignore that. So this is, of course, politics, which is why I don't think at the end of the day that you will see the UK stop sending arms to Israel. But they'll have to be harsh in their rhetoric. They'll have to show the public that they are not okay with this, and as they should, because this incident, like I said, is a tragedy and it should not have happened. So Israel, what Israel can do is to get to the bottom of this, explain exactly what happened, and as they did, take responsibility and then try and do everything they can to prevent it from happening again, really.
Now, of course, Israel is an ally, Israel is a friend, but that's what we do with our friends, right? We hold them to high standards. If it had been an American strike that had killed Brits, we'd be asking exactly the same questions. But thank you so much, Yotam Confino. Really appreciate your time live from Israel there.
Exactly, well put. Well, in other news, Police Scotland have received nearly 4,000 complaints since the new Hate and Public Disorder Act came into force in Scotland just on Monday. And those are complaints within the first 24 hours of this law coming into effect, including a certain Humza Yousaf. He's been reported.
It boggles the mind, doesn't it? The guy who really got this law into place, that saw it through to royal assent, that saw its implementation, has now been hoisted by his own petard. Much more on that after this.
Farage, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m.
I believe our farmers can compete globally. If I visit some Somerset farmers, they are extremely efficient and highly competitive and innovative, and we need to encourage the best.
And it's a high-end product.
It's a high-end product.
Which was one of the points that was being made earlier.
And that we have to focus on what we are good at. And what our protectionism does at the moment is protects Irish beef farmers, French beef farmers and Dutch beef farmers, as opposed to buying cheaper beef from Australia. I have no desire to protect EU farms.
The problem is that we live in the Northern Hemisphere and we have a very difficult climate. So actually, and we know this because when the Corn Laws were repealed in 1846, we know darned well what happened to agriculture.
It led to cheap bread. It made the society much better off.
This has been an argument going on for 150 years.
It's simply wrong. British agriculture didn't collapse at that point. There was a glut in the market 30 years later, which comes much after the Corn Laws.
Well, obviously, things were much slower in those days. It took a long time for that to happen.
Actually, do you know what? The principles of that debate and this debate are not dissimilar.
No, that's right.
They're not dissimilar.
I always go on about the Corn Laws. It's my favourite subject.
No. And it was a wonderful upwelling and grassroots campaign and all the rest of it. But whether we have a Conservative or a Labour government, do you actually think that a Labour government will be any closer or more connected to your community than this Conservative one?
The Labour government, it's in their interest to make sure that Britain has got food. And with the way the world is right now, we're in a very fragile situation, which is why we need food security. And every farmer I know talks about food security because we understand how much less food is being
We better have a look at net zero commitments too, but another time.
Net zero commitments it'll be wind farms.
Enough. We can argue all night about this.
Let's do it. I'm up for arguing all night.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. 24 minutes past 2. Now, police have received nearly 4,000 complaints since the new Hate and Public Disorder Act came into force this week.
Quite incredible. Now, this new law makes stirring up hatred over a number of protected characteristics a crime.
The author J.K. Rowling had been at the forefront of the backlash to the bill, which critics say puts freedom of speech at risk.
Yes, she's come out very strongly indeed. Well, we're joined now by academic and author Dr. Heather Brunskell-Evans. Heather, thank you very much for joining us. It's quite incredible, not just the number of complaints that have already gone in to Police Scotland, nearly 4,000 is what we're reporting in just 24 hours, but also J.K. Rowling's position on all this. She's very much daring the police and, by extension, Humza Yousaf, to arrest her.
Yeah. So she's done something which is a really good thing to do, because what she's done is she's publicly drawing out the consequences of this new bill. And in doing so, she's protecting many other women who are very frightened to speak out and name biological reality, for example, that men are men. And in a sense, she's providing a buffer zone between herself and the ordinary woman on the street, because, of course, she's very famous. She has lots of money if she was embroiled in a legal case. And the police are highly unlikely to have actually done anything, investigated her. So good for her. I think it's a brilliant strategic move that she's made.
Heather, do you think that if it was someone who didn't have the wealth, fame, power, influence, reach of J.K. Rowling who had done the same thing, do you think they would have been treated differently?
Probably, because what is actually happening with the new act is that it's crystallising what has been going on for a number of years, which is that people have been. The police have involved themselves with those who have named biological reality. I myself, indeed, was reported to the West Yorkshire Police for a non-crime hate incident, and that was that I gave a talk that I don't believe, or I think is very harmful to medicalise children on the basis that they identify as a young person as transgender. And that was interpreted by somebody in the audience as a very hateful thing to say. So obviously there were people in the audience who liked what I said, but the point is that hate is a very subjective thing.
How did you find out that the police had logged this as a non-crime hate incident? Because one of the big problems about the J.K. Rowling case in Scotland, of course, is we don't know if it's been logged as a hate crime incident yet, or a non-crime hate incident.
Because I was told this, the person who reported told me that they had done that. And I was briefly in conversation with the West Yorkshire Police and briefly got a legal person involved in it in order to defend myself. Now, the point is, it didn't go any further. That is the reality of it. But it could have gone further. And we don't want to live in an authoritarian, tyrannical regime at which what any person says can be subjectively interpreted by another person as hate, and the police become involved. The police should not be those who are left in charge of what we can and we cannot say.
Are you concerned, Heather, that this type of law will come to England with a change of government?
Well, hopefully, with the kind of media coverage now which J.K. Rowling has managed to establish, which was great. And as I say, this has been going on for years without it really coming to public knowledge. So I think now that that's happened, there may be some difficulty in it being adopted by England. But
I might think again.
The past, that England, Scotland and Wales have been in unison about this.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your time. Great to speak to you. Dr. Heather Brunskell-Evans, academic and author. Really good stuff. I think, yes, actually, everything that's happened and all of this bad press over these laws, it might make a future government think again.
Although
when it comes to England, Wales and the like.
I'm sure what the Scottish National Party will say, though, is, look, J.K. Rowling hasn't been arrested. Look how liberal our new bill is. Look, it might well have been logged as a non-crime hate incident, but she can tweet it.
Yeah, but the fact that there have been...
police knock on the door.
The fact that there have been, you know, nearly 4,000 complaints in 24 hours does rather make a mockery of it.
Yeah, and your point that the amount of police time that this will take up, it's extraordinary.
Yeah, are Scottish people actually less safe physically as a result of these laws, just by virtue of the amount of time and resources it will take off the police? I mean, it's absolute madness from what I can see. 4,000 complaints in 24 hours. I know that's probably like, you know, there's going to be more because the law has just come in.
Well, but you say
it could
that.
Get more.
But if you think about it, how much media coverage did the law get on the Monday versus the Tuesday? The Tuesday was when all of the newspapers reported what J.K. Rowling did. I would be willing to bet the second 24 hours, the 48 hours, will be materially higher than 4,000. It'll be more than 10,000 in aggregate. I think the Tuesday, given all of the media coverage that there was, would be a more significant day for it.
Yes,
so this is just the beginning.
It may well be that number is much higher as we speak than it was there. But let us know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.com. Has Scotland gone down a very authoritarian route? Can you... Is stirring up hatred something that the police should get involved with?
But coming up, a teacher in Birmingham has been sacked for undermining British values after claiming Islam will take over and claiming westernised girls are lunatics. Much more on that after your headlines with Sam.
Very good afternoon to you. 2:31 exactly. The headlines from the GB newsroom this hour. The family of British aid worker John Chapman, who was killed by an Israeli airstrike in Gaza, says he will forever be a hero and that he died trying to help people. The bodies of Mr. Chapman, along with James Henderson and James Kirby, are now being transported out of Gaza. Those 3 British nationals died when their convoy was hit as they were delivering vital food supplies. They were part of a group of 7 aid workers from the World Central Kitchen NGO. Police in Finland say that a 12-year-old boy who was suspected of carrying out a shooting at a school yesterday had been bullied, which officers are treating as the motive. Another student, also aged 12, died in the shooting, which happened in a suburb in the capital, Helsinki. 2 girls of the same age, both 12, were also seriously hurt. Questions are being asked about how a 43-year-old man was able to commit 2 sex attacks years apart, despite receiving a jail sentence. Fareed Issa Tariq will spend 18 years in prison for raping a woman in Swindon after he tricked her into accepting a ride in a fake taxi. He was previously jailed in 2012 for a near-identical crime. And a third of people who have tried to book an appointment with a GP in the last month say that they've struggled to speak to someone. A major new survey found more than 31% found it difficult or very difficult to contact a GP practice. And among those who eventually did book an appointment, 20% reported having a poor experience. That's the latest from the GB newsroom. For more, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. There will be some quite persistent rain, particularly across the northeast through the rest of the day, but further south it will turn much drier. However, further rain will arrive into the southwest this evening. That's as a result of this approaching weather front. But for now, we've got this lingering weather front that will bring persistent heavy rain to parts of southern Scotland, northeast England in particular, but also many areas of eastern Scotland. It's also quite a cold wind here. Further south, it will turn much drier. It will stay largely cloudy, but I think across the south coast, that's where there's the best chance of seeing any sunny breaks this afternoon. It won't feel too bad in any sheltered sunshine, highs of 16 degrees across the southeast this afternoon. Through this evening, it should stay dry for central areas, but another batch of rain will arrive into the southwest later on, and that will push northeastwards throughout the night, bringing many areas of the Midlands quite a damp night. And then a second band of rain arrives into the southwest through the early hours. This one could turn quite heavy and will bring some quite persistent, long-lived heavy rain. So that could bring some tricky travelling conditions for those of you that are travelling on Thursday morning across the southwest, but also into parts of the Midlands and then through the southeast as well. Further north and elsewhere across many areas of the UK, it will turn much drier through the day, and where it's been quite damp recently across the northeast, it will be a much drier day on Thursday. Still largely cloudy, but there will be some sunny breaks here and there, and in the sunshine we'll see highs of 15 or 16 degrees. That's all for now. See you later.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm John Vincent. On the M90 southbound in Fife, we've got a lane closed for a multi-vehicle accident at junction 2 Pit Reevy. Severe delays on the M6 southbound in Cheshire. 2 lanes closed for recovery work following an earlier overturned vehicle. That's between junction 20, the Lim interchange, and 19 for Knutsford. And there's also a lane closed on the northbound stretch of the M6 to aid that recovery. On the M40 northbound in Oxfordshire, we've got a lane closed for a broken down vehicle. That's between junction 10, the Cherwell Valley Services, and 11 for Banbury. On the M25 anti-clockwise in Essex, 2 lanes closed there for an accident. That's between junction 27, the M11, and 26 Waltham Abbey. And on the M1 southbound in Bedfordshire, 1 lane closed for an accident between junction 13 Bedford and 12 for Flitwick. That's your latest travel news.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, it's 2:36. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. And a Muslim teacher has been banned for life from teaching after suggesting Islam was going to take over, and he claimed westernised girls were lunatics. Not all of us.
Outrageous. Well, Aqib Khan taught English at Harborne Academy in Birmingham and was sacked after a misconduct hearing found he was undermining fundamental British values.
Well, we're joined now by GB News West Midlands reporter Jack Carson, who's outside the school itself. Jack, reading about what this teacher was saying in the classroom, it's quite shocking how he was in the job to begin with.
It certainly is. I mean, this is the review and the final decision from a panel from the Teaching Regulations Agency. This whole situation stems from actually a report from another member of staff here at the school who is growing in concerns around the conduct of 30-year-old Aqib Khan with his students. The member of staff put in, a part of their own internal safeguarding portal, put in a message and concerns that he was seeing, and then that internal investigation from the school which suggested that there had been inappropriately religious views as well as harmful comments about dating and relationships was then passed on to the Teaching Regulations Agency, where they conducted, of course, their own investigation and heard from Mr. Khan's representations, as well as, of course, the school and the presentation of evidence. Some of it, as you said, quite shocking. I mean, just to go through some of the things that this panel heard that he had said. We heard that he'd used words to the effect of that having a baby over the age of 30 was worse than cousin marriage, and that the child will most likely have disabilities, as you were mentioning, calling westernised girls lunatics. There was also one incident where he had sent a photo to a Microsoft Teams group chat which did involve students of a topless photo of him flexing. He was trying to, at one point, teach his students how to get girls. There are other examples, countless examples of how he told students that he'd once rejected a female doctor who earned £70,000 just because he simply said he couldn't be with a woman that had earned as much as him. And so, as you can see, it's very windy here, but that just kind of shows you just kind of some of the things that the panel, of course, had heard, and they decided upon that panel that there was unacceptable professional standards that had been breached. He has been suspended and can then appeal that suspension from March in 2026.
So as you understand it, Jack, thanks for battling the wind there. I hope you're all right. But as we understand it, who reported this teacher to this panel, to this teaching regulation agency professional misconduct panel? Was it students themselves? Was it parents of students? Was it other teachers?
So it was a fellow member of staff within the school that had heard of, obviously, reports possibly from students inside the school that had then gone onto the safeguarding portal from the academy, inside the academy itself, and then the school launched its own investigations with its findings, interviewing students about this alleged conduct. That's when they then passed this on to the Teaching Regulations Agency, whose panel has decided, of course, that he should have an indefinite ban unless, of course, he appeals it. But what was interesting to note is that his representatives within the panel in those proceedings had kind of addressed that the the workload that Mr. Khan was facing, as well as the particularly stressful conditions, but actually what the panel deduced from all of this is actually that there was no evidence to suggest that Mr. Khan was under any kind of duress, and actually they said in the report that they found his actions to be calculated and motivated.
Oh, really fascinating stuff. Well, Jack Carson, thank you very much for bringing us that live from Birmingham, of course. And Emily, I suppose...
So he said he was stressed?
I suppose this is an example, actually, perhaps rarely within our education system, the system actually working.
Yeah, well, quite. I mean, the government has talked a lot about how important British values are, how we need to make sure the curriculum represents those British values, and that things like this do get called out and do get investigated, and that, there's actually a consequence.
Yeah, when people like Michael Gove started talking about British values, they were ridiculed.
Scoffed. People
said, oh, what on earth are British values? Well, here's an example of where actually that sort of language around British values has been able to get quite an extreme individual out of our schools.
But could there be more teachers like this in schools around the country who are spouting forth with all this absolute nonsense that I think most of us would agree is completely against British values, saying Islam's going to take over, saying westernised girls are lunatics, and I would say to that, not all of us are, and that, sending topless pictures on how to get girls and how you're going to have disabled children if you have a child over the age of 30, worse than cousin marriage.
Medieval values.
Yeah.
It's not even not British values, it's just medieval values. But let's talk about this further with the commentator Khadija Khan Lodi. Khadija, thank you so much for making the time for us here. I want to raise that point with you, actually. Has this shown, obviously there's a problem in some schools, has this, however, shown that this is a problem that we're starting to crack down upon with this idea of British values?
This problem has been there for a while, and I think it's been a huge criminal negligence on the part of authorities who have been, reluctant in dealing with this issue of extremism and extreme radical, ideologies, prevailing across the UK. So listening about, this teacher who has been telling his students such obnoxious things, such as feminism is not good enough, and about all those things which are like Muslims are taking over. These are not the truth, but yes, these ideologies, these radical extreme ideologies, they do exist. We need to come to terms with this reality, and we have to stop, tiptoeing around this issue of extremism being taught in certain religious seminaries, and certain individuals who are pushing this kind of radical thoughts into social discourse.
Yes, Khadija, do you think that too often people are able to say, oh, well, it's my religious freedom, it's my religion, this is my culture, and therefore anything goes, and then it clashes with other people's idea of what British values should look like?
In Britain, we are all free to follow whatever beliefs we may choose for ourselves. religious people are very much free to follow their religious belief to an extent where they don't infringe upon others' rights. And when it comes to espousing British values, we need to be very much clear about that. British values of tolerance, of diversity, of cohesion, really. We need to appreciate and we need to promote these values in the schools, in the society, in the politics, because these are the values which glue people into a cohesive unit. We cannot just let people ghettoize themselves and telling us that it's their culture or religion or they are going to just go about their lives accordingly. We need to make it sure in public discourse, through discussions, through dialogues, that there are certain values which are espoused by British people, and these are British values, and we need to promote and we need to adhere to these values in order to have a cohesive society.
Yes, I think it's a really important point you raised there about the certain ghettoisation of certain cultures. And I wonder, is this the fundamental distinction we need to make between Islam, which is a private religion people may practice freely amongst themselves, and Islamism, when you try and place those values upon other people, place that way of being, force it on people who don't want it?
I have been very much clear about this thing, that Islam is a religion and people are free to follow that religion in the UK, in a free Western society. So we have no problem with people following their religion as long as it is not being imposed onto the wider society. And when you talk about drawing a distinction between Islam and Islamism, people like me, you and me, we are drawing that distinction. We're trying to maintain that distinction. But if you look at the commentator from the Muslim community, some commentator, they would like to blur this line and they would ask you, what is Islamism? Where does it exist? Sorry, it does exist. We see it. And the teacher, this incident is an epitome of that kind of, ideology being prevalent, in our society.
Khadija, do you worry that these views are typical for some sections of society? Do you think that there's a problem with some Muslim men, that they have perhaps views that we don't consider to be British values?
There are certain readings of religion which are misogynistic, which are discriminatory, which are homophobic. We need to be honest about it. We need to be calling it out whenever we hear these kind of views. It's been a long time that we are letting these kind of ideologies crawling in, spreading tentacles in British society, and we are just ignoring it in the name of respecting people's culture and religion. You are not suppressed in the UK. You are enjoying your right, your freedom to follow your religion as it may appease you, and it may please you, but what you are not allowed to do is to impose your intolerant beliefs onto the wider society. People there is a recent example, the Hadith was displayed on King's Cross Station. It was removed after a huge backlash from the public. It's a clear message that we don't want to see any particular religion to dictate our, day-to-day lives. We want to see people enjoying their freedoms and practicing their religion in the private sphere.
That's a very strong message. Khadija, thank you. That's a very strong message to finish with. Really appreciate your time. Khadija Khan Lodi, who is a commentator and also a member of Don't Divide Us.
Well, after the break, we'll be hearing your views on whether support for Israel is wavering following the tragic deaths of aid workers. We'll be revisiting the conversation we had with a spokesperson for the Israeli government as well. Don't go anywhere.
I'm Mark Dolan, and this is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan Tonight, weekends from 9 p.m.
We've got a problem in this country, and it smells like you-know-what, because it is you-know-what. It's all throughout our waterways. They're absolutely full of it. You'd think in the 6th richest nation you could manage basic sanitation, but in 2024 in the UK, you'd be wrong. And it's so bad that this weekend's boat race was affected by the amount of E. coli in the Thames. I know what you're thinking. When will these kids who go to Oxford and Cambridge universities get a break in life? But it is an embarrassment. We can't hold an event on our rivers now. The rowers were given safety advice before the race that they should avoid getting any splashed water in their mouths during a rowing race. You might as well tell them to try not to rush. Leonard Jenkins of the Oxford men's team said it would be a lot nicer if there wasn't as much poo in the water. How terrible that that needs to be said. The only time that would be worse is if you read that in a TripAdvisor review of a cafe. On Wednesday, Environment Agency figures revealed raw sewage spills doubled last year in England to 3.6 million hours of spills, compared with 1.75 million hours in 2022. I was shocked that it happens so much we have to measure poos by the hour. To put that in context that you might understand, an hour of poo is about 30 trips for a woman and about 2 for a man. This is because our water systems get overwhelmed when they get a lot of rain. Hello, have you met the UK before? Rain is pretty much our thing. Sewage is spilled into the waterways to prevent the system backing up. In a statement issued before the race, Thames Water said, "We have experienced higher than average long-term rainfall across London." Yeah, how can you have higher than average long-term rainfall? If it's long-term, it increases the average. Do the math, step up and learn to cope with it.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, it's 2:50 in the afternoon, and we're going to return to our top story that 3 British aid workers have been killed after being hit by an Israeli missile strike in Gaza. Now, earlier, we heard from Conservative MP and member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Henry Smith, who says Israel needs to act in a responsible manner.
A dreadful attack on innocent British civilians who were trying to bring aid to people who need it, civilians in Gaza. And Israel does have a right to defend itself. Hamas started this conflict. They still need to release those hostages. But Israel has to act with responsibility. It can't just respond militarily without care and due attention. And I think what we have seen is a somewhat careless attitude of the IDF. If Israel continue to act carelessly in terms of its military operations, all it does is radicalize more people, both in Gaza and around the world.
Henry Smith speaking there a little bit earlier. Now, we also spoke with Israeli government spokesperson David Mencer, who said wars can be unpredictable.
First things first, this is a war zone. I don't know if you understand that. There is a terrible war going on in Gaza. It's not a war that we started, a war that we wanted, but it is a war that we will pursue to the end. This is a war zone. Mistakes happen in war. That is not a justification. That is a fact.
There we go, David Mencer, Israeli government spokesperson. And throughout the show, you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on this topic. And don't forget, you can continue to email us any time of day, gbviews@gbnews.com. But Dean says it seems most politicians are looking for an excuse to damn Israel.
Well, Jonathan says no matter how appalling October the 7th attacks were, they do not justify the indiscriminate shelling and bombing of civilians, which is a war crime, however you look at it. And he goes on to say that we should demand that it stops immediately and boycott Israel too. Goodness, Jonathan.
Well, Peter says Gaza is a war zone, which is what David Minster said, and if you place yourself within that arena for whatever reason, you take your chances. A lot happens within the fog of war that appears like a war crime when it was just an accident, and this is why it's so important that there is a thorough investigation. The IDF will be investigating itself, so questions over that.
There are. Tom, who has a marvellous, splendid name, so well done on that, says we should continue to support Israel fully in their efforts to eradicate a terror group. I suppose that should be remembered in all of this conversation. They are fighting an insidious and embedded terror organisation in the Gaza Strip.
Yes, and George says none of the MPs, i.e. Ed Davey, or anyone calling for an immediate ceasefire, they only call on Israel for the immediate ceasefire when they should be calling on Hamas to release all hostages to be able to effect an immediate ceasefire. Yes, that cannot be lost in all of this.
Yeah, I have to think, if all the hostages were released tomorrow, I have no doubt there would be a ceasefire. No doubt at all.
Well, that's it from us. Thank you for joining us on Good Afternoon Britain. But Martin Downey is up next, so let's see what he's got coming up on his show. What have you got coming up?
Cracking show as ever, guys. Today I've got Lee Anderson in the studio. His first interview since the war of words broke out with the Conservative Party. He'll have lots to say on that. Plus, we'll speak to an investigative journalist who spent a lot of time in the Calais jungle in light of the fact a man has been stabbed to death in Dunkirk today. This is just the tip of the iceberg. We do not want these people coming over the channel. Plus, 4 o'clock, will Johnny Mercer, the Veterans Minister, be facing jail? All of that to come on my show 3 till 6. But first, it's time for your latest weather forecast.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update. Well, further persistent rain is to come for northeastern areas, but further south has turned much drier through the day. But in the southwest, we'll see the next batch of rain arrive through this evening and overnight. That's as this weather front arrives from the southwest. But this weather front up to the northeast, that's what's been bringing this persistent rain to parts of eastern Scotland, northeastern England as well in particular. There's been quite a cold wind as well, so it's been quite a miserable feeling day, and that we're going to stay with that wet weather through much of the night. Across western Scotland, though, it's a very different story, much drier. Here we could see a touch of frost overnight. Further south, though, we're going to see bands of rain, so showery outbreaks of rain are likely for most areas overnight tonight. But it's in the southwest where we'll see the heaviest rain tomorrow morning. This area will push into parts of Wales, the Midlands, and then into the southeast throughout the first few hours of Thursday. So expect some tricky driving conditions if you are travelling Thursday morning. But once it does clear out the way, there'll be a mix of showers around for many areas of England and Wales. But further north, it's going to be a considerably drier day than it has been lately. So a bit of respite on the way, and we'll start to feel a little bit warmer in any of that sunshine that we do see. However, on Thursday night, the next batch of rain will arrive from the southwest. This will bump into cold air across Scotland, and that will fall as snow over the Grampians and the Highlands. But once it does clear out the way, it will turn considerably milder, but also significantly more windy. So it will be a windy weekend, but we could see temperatures climbing above 20 degrees for the first time this year.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You could win our biggest prize giveaway so far. First, there's an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. Plus, courtesy of Variety Cruises, a bespoke 7-night small boat cruise for two worth £10,000. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, your next holiday could be on us. Choose any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and find your home at sea. We'll also send you packing with these luxury travel gifts. gifts. For a chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
I don't think you can go and watch a Shakespeare play unless you already know it. It's almost like you have to understand the story and the characters and perhaps have even done a bit of reading into it. Because if you went completely blind, especially in today's world where we don't speak in that kind of way, it is, I think, probably a bit alienating.
But Dawn is saying it is alienating at the moment because of the lack of representation.
You know what, the actual phrasing they use, right, OK, the disproportionate representation propagated white, able-bodied, heterosexual, cisgender male narratives. I'm sure there's people sitting in a room going, what's the most ridiculous thing we can come up with today?
Yes.
But really, just chuck all these words at it, cisgender, and it's just insane. Of course, Shakespeare was what it was back in the day, and that's why it's mostly blokes and they're mostly white.
And lots of speculation that he was actually gay, isn't there? Because he never really saw Anne Hathaway very often and stayed away a lot of the time. I don't know, maybe he was a big
He might have been
gay icon.
transgender for all I know. I mean, I don't...
Biggins, I'm looking at you.
No, I think you're right. I mean, you know, I think that goes for the profession too. I mean, I do think I mean, I remember seeing Macbeth in London with Judi Dench and Ian McKellen, and it was one of the most exciting evenings ever. And it was a cold night at the Donmar Theatre, outside and inside, and that gave it atmosphere. There are certain things that you go along and see something else, and you think, I'll walk out in the interval.
Yeah. Macbeth is a sexy play, though.
Let's talk about, there's so many. Can I live to be 100?
Oh, this is depressing.
I think it is depressing. I like to stay here now. I don't want to live to 100.
Don't say that.
I'm right behind you.
I don't even want to. My father died at 63. That'll be me gone this year.